stumbled out, and I was terrified to even express this dream. It was such a bad one. And my mom and dad were having a little cocktail party, 1960s style, and I think my dad had a turtleneck on and a blazer.
Think Ad Man.
Kind of, yeah.
Or
and,
is it Mad Men?
yeah.
I can't remember the.
Yeah, and he was making a mint julep. No, it was a cream de mint. It had like a layer of cream. I'm watching him do this in the parties over there, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing up?" And I said, "I had a bad dream." And he said, "Oh, what was it? What was your dream?" And I said, "I can't tell you." And he said, "Oh, no, why?" And I said, "Because you'll be mad at me. I'll get in trouble." And he said, "No, you can't get in trouble for having a dream. Your dreams, you can't get in trouble for those." And I remember that momentous anxiety as it welled up as I finally blurted out the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was kind of the bad guy in this dream, he really laughed. He laughed. But he gave me the best gift, and two gifts. One is he was compassionate and curious as a parent and as a human being toward me with whatever it was I was finding overwhelming. That's very important for us to not ever lose that curiosity in each other, I don't think. Second of all, he let me know that you can't get in trouble for your dreams, that is an area of you where you are learning and capable of experiencing serious impact, actually, without it being right here and now where we can get blamed for our choices. This is a different arena of human experience.
The way through this is greater complexity. Anything that limits the scope of a system, I think, is potentially symptomatic. So the goal is subjective complexity. So the goal is, if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self when he was seeing the David Lee Roth and the David Byrne, to be able to say there are elements of you in both of these folks. I mean, David Roth is a funny guy, highly intelligent,
Sure.
in some ways was a parody of the very things that you felt were oppressive. You know, he's not, and if you look even closer, the Marlboro Man, I don't know the Marlboro Man, but his equivalent would be Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. And, you know, Eastwood's is a director capable of some very sophisticated understanding of himself and the world, complexity. So I think the goal would be is it's okay to label something as potentially problematic, and that is a sign that you then need to engage with it.
Right.
That's when the dance begins. So it's not a matter of canceling or cutting away, but engage. What does it mean to be this? Why is it there? How does it reflect parts of you? How might it inform you in some ways? Parts of it you might want to own. But I think the goal is,
Those are great questions.
you know, move toward complexity. A system should become richer. The place at the table, as we have, you know, non-binary, as we have folks who identify as transgendered, it should make us better understand who and what we are as a culture, as individuals. We should that complexity is coming. It's like a tidal wave.
Right.
So we need to be able to own more and more of it.
I like it. I mean, I like the idea that the recommendation is that first recognize that it's much more complexity in our relationships, with our inner selves, with other people, and all those things that in our culture and our society, and we need to do something to better understand that. And those questions that you just asked, I'm wondering if people are there. And so I guess brings out the pessimist a little bit. I'm generally optimist, so to speak, but people have to get educated. They have to have some insight. They have to start thinking about these tough questions that counter their beliefs that they held on. And those are the interesting, I guess, challenges ahead.
And I think that's why this notion of engagement, that whatever destabilizes you is, in a psychological sense, you can spit it out, you can evacuate it into someone else, and that's where that homosexual panic comes in. Or you can get better at your suffering. You can dance and engage with the things that destabilize because they make you richer. And I do think that that is a hard road, and a number of people, maybe even Johnny Depp, might get trampled in the process. But we keep walking it. We keep walking it.
Watch productions from the Columbus area and our educational programming.
Training with folks who trained under Heinz Kohut. Kohut was a guy who invented this thing called self-psychology. It still exists.
Stay connected to Columbus by watching on your mobile device or laptop. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Leaning in, what is that?
Well, it's a way of sort of allowing yourself to be able to be in the presence of the thing you're feeling. So when you lean in, you cultivate a certain, you're sort of observing and allowing yourself to experience what's happening with you. And you do that with other people. Like, it's often easy to illustrate this, what not leaning in would be. Let's say you're sitting at home, you took the day off, you're laying on the sitting on the couch in your underwear watching some Andy Griffith.
Okay.
Or some, The View. I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of that show. So
Okay.
you're watching The View, and your
It's
wife
news to me,
comes
but
in,
go.
and she notices that you have done nothing, but you've been sitting on it. And she comes in and she starts to get angry. She gets angry. She yells at you.
Right.
Okay. If you begin yelling back, that would be an example of not leaning in. But if
Not-
you allowed yourself to take a breath and you lean in, you might say, wait a minute, my wife's had a long day. She may have come in and had seen my leisure, my Uber leisure activities may have triggered some things in her. There may be, by leaning in, I can help name exactly what she's experiencing. And I might be able to be present for her in a way that I wasn't before. You can do the same for yourself. If for instance, I woke up this morning not in the best mood.
Okay.
I wasn't. I was
Sorry to hear
a
that,
little
actually.
cranky. I was
Yes,
a little
well,
cranky.
it happens to us all. I'm thinking.
I blame Ivanka Trump. But,
Okay. Here we go.
But as an aside, this is one of the
Yes.
things I've been thinking about too. Like, am I wrong? But did one of Trump's sons look like the guy from American Psycho? Is that just me?
Give us an idea of how we can manage this confirmation bias stuff. We know what it is now, and how best we can we manage it.
Well, here's what I would say that we need to stick to this notion of the tyranny of automaticity. But I might attenuate that and say that, it's not a tyranny, but it's a necessity. From an evolutionary biological perspective, we're not supposed to be having big thoughts all the time. That would be completely wasteful, and we wouldn't be able to enjoy our Rice Krispies. We would have a relationship with the world that I don't think would be good for us or the world. So I'm not necessarily knocking confirmation bias, at least in that sense. What I think we need to think about is, how can we maintain the possibility and openness that when we are in the presence of something that generates some sort of emotional storm, that causes some disequilibrium, can we be honest enough with ourselves to be able to stay in that space long enough to dance with it? The possibility of giving it a name. When I thought about the fact that Trump got elected, as opposed to saying I'm going to move to Canada, or, everybody around me is idiots, I needed to think to myself, wait a minute, right now I'm really upset, I'm scared, this is not what I expected, but what if it forces me to have to think about the world that I live in differently? And maybe I live in a bubble. Maybe I've got this middle class existence, I am part of a professional middle class. It keeps me from thinking about other folks who are in different places. But I would need to be able to I would allow myself the impact and that emotional impact, and I would have to be able to dance with it. So I think not that confirmation bias needs to be taken away, or at least when we're thinking about it globally, but we need to be more honest and aware of what we're experiencing and to try to be able to do something with those things. There are moments in the day when we really should have thoughts. Probably very few moments in the day. Maybe there are very few moments in the week that require thoughts in the way Beyond was describing them. But they do come, they do happen.
Yes, I mean, there is this stream of consciousness that seems to be always on. I mean, that's why it may be the sort of new discovery of meditation and mindfulness and those kind of practices are sort of helping us get away from that continuous thought process, because I think that the thoughts, you can ruminate, you can go over and over and around in OCD and all of those good things with it.
There have been some real criticism of mindfulness, and I think mindfulness can be very important in making us more attuned to what moves inside us and to be more respectful of the things we feel. and to allow certain things to move through us if we don't need. But mindfulness, actually, if we're not careful, can really stand in the way of accommodation, because Zizek talked about before, talks about the Western Buddhism, and if you notice, there are all these they're teaching mindfulness at work, and these corporations are having mindfulness and all that sort of stuff. And the idea is, as opposed to thinking about, like, I don't know, I don't think they have it at Walmart. I'm not knocking Walmart, but let's use that as an example.
All right, go.
So they're having all these we're teaching all our employees to meditate so they can, well, maybe the reason they're upset is because there's something that needs to be changed, and you're just teaching them how to be able to to giving them a stiff drink or a sedative in a way to be able to stay with it. So accommodation requires suffering, and so mindfulness in the service of not having to think or change the world around you might actually be an evil thing.
Okay. So in some ways we need to be a participant in that, not just an observer, as we talked about here. All right, that's been very cool. Tom, good to have you in the studio. It's always a pleasure. I never know exactly what we're going to talk about, but I'm interested. So first of all, how are you? What's going on?
I'm good. I'm feeling a little bit of trepidation though with this topic, a little bit, because
let me get a close up of you in being with that intrepidation
being
here.
fearful, feeling a little bit of fear. Well, it's not.
I think we're all fine. So tell me about it, though. I want to understand.
Well, so we talked about it, maybe a couple of subjects. This kind of reminds me of the infamous episode where we did the leadership practices of the Grateful Dead. Came in with an article, didn't have any questions, and just riffed off that. So we're riffing off the whole idea of millennials.
I like riffing, just to make a statement about that, because I think we freeform some things.
Yeah.
And we're not spitting out something that's written and staged. But that's exactly why I think you had a bit of trepidation there, because we can go off in left field, and at least I can, and not get back very, very quickly. So being limited and that kind of thing. But I think today we're going to talk about millennials, because millennials, listen, we hear the term, it's just like anything else, and we're going to talk a little bit later about Pinker, I think, in some of his book, from his new book, some things out of there. But first, it just seems like that we have an impression of what millennials, there's a tag, there's a hashtag, there's a term that's out there, and I think we quickly draw a conclusion about what that means, and we move on. And until we kind of move back into examining what these millennials are doing, what they're facing, what the environment is like at this point, I don't think we really know. So it's good that you want to talk about that.
Well, there's kind of a conventional wisdom, right? That there is a millennial person,
right?
And
they're all and it's a group.
It's a group,
and they're all exactly the same.
Yeah. They have these commonalities, and I remember this first became a sort of hot topic when we were college professors, right?
Right.
And we're going to get the millennials. The millennials are coming.
Yes, and we had to prepare for them in a certain way. We had to look at the content we're trying to teach and make sure that they're at a level they can understand. We can communicate with them. We challenge them, and then get to know a little bit more about what it's all about to be a millennial.
Well, they're all tech savvy. That was the first thing.
Oh, they're
coming in with tech, and you don't have tech. You're a what is it? You're a digital immigrant. They're digital natives.
Digital natives.
So
I love
what
it.
I found when I brought the tech to class, they were like, well, yeah, I use it for Facebook and, that kind of thing. But the idea that you could utilize technology in class to stimulate up to the moment discussion, facts, that kind of thing.
First of all, I think that's keen that you kind of talked about that. I also realized that they were using technology in the class between each other, so they were communicating in the class.
Yep, that's right.
Not talking verbally, so that you would sort of see that happen as much as they were on their instruments flying back and forth.
Right.
And so there was another conversation going on in the classroom that you were not necessarily privy to.
Yeah, my graduate assistant hit me to that. I mean, I mentioned the next day after a class where I said, I think it's good that we have technology and all, and that folks can look things up, and it doesn't really bother me.
Right.
And she said, well, you know what they're doing? And I said, no. She said, well, they're texting each other. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, but they're texting about what we're discussing in class. So there's an ongoing constant discussion going on.
Right. Because the fear would be that they're saying, hey, this professor is not all that great. Let me register. Let me go on to rate my professor and give him a 1 star or something.
It could have been that, or it could have been, I'm going to have a margarita after class, or I'm going to Simply Greek to eat.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been anything, but according to my graduate assistant at that time, it was sort of an ongoing conversation, which I thought, that's pretty cool.
I think I didn't mean to frame it too negatively there, because I think those guys, especially the ones I had in my class, were graduate, and yours as well, were graduate students, so they were dedicated. They wanted to learn. They were ready for that. So, but it's that little nagging thought about, okay, I'm not privy to that communication. I think we should all be communicating in that. So
you have this whole idea of millennials are now in the workforce. Some of them are approaching, I guess, 30. So they've been in the workforce a while. I know one of my colleagues was talking about the next group, the post-millennials or homelanders, some people call them. It's a whole different group, a whole different generation that's now hitting the universities as freshmen, sophomores, that kind of thing. So time marches on, right?
Right, and I'm just aware that we did a little research. We're going to pull up some websites here to take a look at, and there's one that makes a list of the top 10 issues.
The top
facing.
10 issues.
We're going to give a shout out to these guys here in just a moment. But
Best Work, bestwork.com.
Bestwork.com. We want to appreciate their helping us with our discussion today, and so they've listed 10, and let me read this first one to you and let you react. Okay, here we go. Millennials are the brainiest, best educated generation ever, according to a special report compiled by The Economist.
Okay.
Wow. What just happened? Weren't we well educated too, Tom? I don't know how you feel about that, but these guys got it on us quite a bit.
Well, and my question, I guess, to that would be what constitutes that best education? See, sometimes when you drill down, is it the best education in terms of the traditional Western canon of literature? We learn some math, we learn some science. B, what about different kinds of practices that you may need to work in the new millennial? Are they learning about that? What constitutes the best education ever?
Well, I think you got a big point there, and best. I mean, how do you define that? It's an impossible task for most of us. I think they were saying that 61% of adult millennials have attended college, compared to 46% of baby boomers.
Right.
So here we go, throwing baby boomers under the bus again. But there's more opportunity for education. Now, I'm going to jump ahead and say that part of this problem they're facing is the way they had to pay for that education,
Right,
because
yeah.
I think they're coming out with all of this debt,
Right.
and we're hearing about that in the news, and it's a big deal in the political campaigns and all of those things.
Cost of college has gone up,
Yes.
and it's gone up. One reason is because of what people expect out of the college experience. So,
Right.
and that's not often discussed. I mean, one of the things is that, well, the cost of college has gone up, and it's everyone's having to take out these loans, but college is very competitive. So in order to attract students, you as a college, I guess, had to look at what other people were doing and match that so you were competitive. And some of those things were costly, you know.
Yes.
So it did drive up the cost. And then, facilities and perks for students, and if it's a residential facility, do you have a climbing wall? Do you have plenty of swimming
that was part of
facilities?
it. The universities had to get
Right.
lazy rivers and
That
other
was the big
kinds of
thing. The
things.
lazy river got to be but there were so many of those kinds of things, and also the kinds of things like first year experiences and all the support for students on campus that when you and I attended, we attended the same college at the same time, and the support for students at that time
Right.
was largely go to the gym. You may be lucky, and you may have a card number that enables you to actually get some courses you need. That was
Yes, that
I
was-
remember
that's really
my
interesting.
first year experience. Now, first year experience is it's a huge thing
Yes.
for the millennials, post millennials, but baby boomers. When we went through, college didn't cost it anywhere near as much. But I can remember sitting outside the gym at 3:00 in the afternoon, having been there since 8, and I had a salmon-colored card. And when I got in there, there were no freshman courses available to take except a couple of PEs. I remember I got flicker ball.
Okay,
And
there we go.
so that
I
was
got
a
a
sport.
chip and putt course at one point about
Okay.
golf. So yeah, that's how it works.
So it was a different time. And
Yeah, it really was, and I think part of what you're saying is that universities have to be attractive to the upcoming students
Yeah.
to get them in and keep the population enrollment up, of course, and that they focused on that. So they've changed the environment. You know, the libraries now, the kiosks, the groupings,
Right.
the coffee shops in the library, those kind of things are a regular feature on the college campus, and that's to keep people involved. But you talked about the freshman experience.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there was a freshman experience when you and I were coming up.
Well, there was one, but it was you just experienced what went on, and I was sort of a non-traditional student, and you were too in a way. You came back after having been on the road with a rock band and playing all over the United States, and then you decided to come back to college. I came back to college after I went as a freshman and then dropped out and spent a few years doing different things, do some different kinds of work and that kind of thing, which I think was all good for me.
Right.
But when I returned, then I worked full time and attended college in the daytime. I worked full time at night. So, there was no real rah-rah college experience for me. It was if I made class at 9, good,
Right.
because I was up till 1 o'clock in the morning working the night before.
Right. And
that was
that-
my freshman year, my first year experience.
Wow. Okay. Well, mine's similar, and the idea that work was a big part of getting through school as well. So the universities have done their research. That's why we have these climbing walls and so forth to attract students in,
Yep.
as well as tuitions going up. And now we're getting to the point where millennials have accumulated a lot of debt. They're looking for jobs, but they may be underemployed. So let's take a look at this survey again, where it says that the U.S. Census data shows that 40% of our nation's unemployed are millennials.
Yeah.
What's up with that? What's the first reaction you have to this 40% being?
So what is underemployed? What does that mean? Because with my college degree, the first thing I did was I went out and I worked for a convenience store. Then the second thing I did was run a cigarette route in Atlanta and work at a restaurant at night. So when I was first married, I had a college degree, but I was working nights in a restaurant and days as a vendor. And that was just, that's what we did until you sort of found yourself and found what you were going to ultimately do.
Well, the unemployment, that's just a research analyst that looked at those statistics. And I'm thinking that, is there a lack of jobs out there? We hear the labor statistics coming out in the news. What is it that is really behind this unemployment for millennials? I think we can talk some more. Maybe we'll come up with an idea or two about that.
Well, could it be a philosophical thing for universities? I mean, universities have typically aimed at an education that has a breadth and depth. And then technical colleges have aimed at an education that essentially prepared you for a gig.
Right.
So I know
that's why they sort of targeted where the liberal college education was just kind of helping you understand the world and becoming a critical thinker and be prepared for whatever that job is. And now it seems like jobs are very specific, particularly technology jobs and other types of jobs that are out there. So
yeah,
I'm kind of curious.
But I guess my question is where do we actually lock in on the majority of young people as to finding a career path, for instance? For me, it really ended up late in my 20s, and of course that was a different time. But if we are expecting every college graduate to come out and at 22, 23 years old find their career and hit at a huge salary, at whatever they perceive as a huge salary. Incidentally, we were talking about Steven Pinker.
Right.
He would say, right now we live in the wealthiest economy that's ever existed on the face of the planet. And it's not just here, it's globally. So there are some thinkers that say conventional wisdom says underemployed, whereas if you really look at true standard of living, even for folks who at another time may have been in poverty, the actual standard of living, their longevity expectations, their entertainment, their potential for entertainment, that those things are so astronomically better than, say, they were when you and I graduated from college in the 70s.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, that would be Pinker's view.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty valid view as well. I mean, everybody's got an $800 cell phone, and they're always connected. There's got entertainment on demand.
Right,
I mean,
right.
Education on demand, too, as well. And just exposure and the communication, which we talked about last time, the idea that the communication age, the information age, it's all kind of come together at this point so that it does seem like Pinker's on the right track when you look at how wealthy we really are. And then, of course, the issue is you could take that for granted, but comparatively, you're absolutely right. And I think he's right in that. So,
well, anyway, his writing is provocative, and in reading the book and discussing it with friends, I always issue the caveat: I don't agree with everything he says.
Right, of course.
But at the same time, going back to underemployed, my first question would be: is that really true? What does underemployed mean? It means you're not pulling down six figures or the high fives in your 20s? Well,
Right.
I mean,
You can't be the CEO when you come out of college. Don't
Well,
you have to work in the mailroom and get yourself kind of up to speed with that? Maybe not. Maybe there's a different impression that if I'm a millennial and I've got all of these advantages, maybe I should go up the ladder quicker.
I can illustrate with an anecdote. There's a millennial couple I'm familiar with.
Okay.
That they're both employed. Neither of them probably has the end game career employment. At the same time, they both own their cars. They have what I think of is a domicile. They don't own a house, but they're talking about buying one.
Okay.
They're living in an apartment.
Okay.
The apartment's very nice. It's a
Okay.
gated community. And then things I wouldn't have thought of. For instance, they didn't get cable TV, for instance,
Okay.
because it's just sort of boring. They'd rather have Netflix, where they have whatever at their
choice and so forth, cutting the cable. Yes.
Yeah. So, are some things still out there where they could become more affluent in relation to where they are now? Oh, absolutely. But when I compare where I was at that age as a young married guy with 2 children, there's just no comparison as to what's available for them and what was available for me. I mean,
yes.
I can sure remember going to my dad when we'd had a tough month and saying, "Hey, I need you to float me a little something so I can take the kid to the doctor." Luckily, I had that ability.
Yeah.
So, again, my question is, what are the expectations? Are the expectations that we had some roaring times during the Clinton era, and people would come out of college and make the high fives and the low 6-figure incomes? Yeah. Was it everybody? I think you'd have to take a look at that. Anyway,
let's take a look at this this next idea here, that the Americans between 18 and 34 are earning less today than the same group did in the past. So this says something about you. Yes, you have more resources now. You had less then, but they're not making as much money coming out of college in this day and age. So, and I'd heard this before, that your children may not make as much money, and the American dream was always the next generation will do better than the last, and we'll keep kind of progressing in that way. So there's some challenges to that now.
Well, see, and again, I wonder if perhaps when you look at the comparison of purchase power of dollars today and the purchase power of dollars when we're making the comparisons, if that's accurate, my question would be, could you go on Amazon and find clothes at 40% discount, or buy a reasonable car for under $20,000? I mean, I understand that when you compare dollars to dollars in inflation, in inflationary terms, maybe that is true. But if that is true, why do so many have so much? I mean, since I don't have the figures in front of me,
No, but I mean that's a very good point. But let me add this. It seems like, and Dan Rose and I talk about stress and mental illness, mental health, those kind of issues, and it seems like this millennial generation is having to deal with more stress, depression, other kinds of things. Here's what's said on the on this list of millennial problems. Millennials are reporting the highest levels of stress and depression than any other generation at the same age.
Okay.
So where's it? Yeah, I mean, what comes with more opportunity and advances some other things come with it too.
Or
like
is the operative word reporting?
Okay.
Because if you expected the George H.W. Bush generation that endured the Depression, the Great Depression, and World War II, if you expected them to talk about how depressed they were with the stresses of the Cold War, the likelihood would be that they wouldn't have discussed it. I think of my father and his colleagues from the military, you know, at that era, and my father returning from Vietnam.
Right.
There would never be any discussion of it was stressful, it was scary, I'm depressed, I got PT. I mean, that.
I hear where you're coming from, just the reporting of it.
I'm not sure those things weren't there.
Right.
And I'm not sure that they didn't present in other ways. For instance, acting in ways that you know, the conventional wisdom was, well, Dad went, he went to war and then he came back. He's a different guy. He just wasn't the same guy.
Right.
Well, and I can sure tell you when you woke my dad up, you woke him up standing in the doorway. You didn't go tap him in bed.
Right.
Because he presented all kinds of combat savvy skills that you didn't want to be the victim of. Right. As when he came out of a deep sleep.
For your safety.
But now, growing up, and I knew a lot of career Army personnel who had been in several combat theaters. Some of them really, really bad. Vietnam, Korea was really bad.
Of course.
And so the question is, are we more willing, in a good way, to talk about these things? So is that an apt comparison? I don't know.
No.
And again, I'm just throwing these things out for thought. It could very well be, yeah, hey, they're just more stressed out and it's more stressful, and gosh, we've got a whole generation of stressed out folks.
Well, I think what you did was bring up a good point about that, and whether it was really reported in the way with all of these changes in technology and communication issues that we're talking about. So it's more out on the table. But one thing that I know about stress for these millennials is that they're under a huge debt. So if you look at if you look at the debt, the Americans owe more than $1.3 trillion in student loans at the end of June when they calculated those numbers. So I don't know about you, but I don't like debt that much, even though I have it. And my job is to get rid of that debt as best I can. But it is a stressor when you wake up and say, how am I going to pay these bills? How am I going to get this credit card down? How am I going to do these things? But now you just paid $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 or more, and you hear some of those cases, for tuition and for college. So they take out these loans, now they got to pay them back.
Yeah, and the cost of college is in comparatively with earlier times is just an unbelievable level of growth. I mean, it's exponential. It's beyond just being twice as much or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like everything's more complicated. Now, that's a blanket statement, and I'll probably regret saying that in that way. But the notion is that I'm not sure I want to be that millennial or that up and coming kid. And with the world as it is now, and we talked about chaos and all the other kind of things in the world, but back to Pinker, he's saying through one of his first books, The Better Angels of Our Nature, saying there's less violence. Well, and so when you talk about we're richer than ever, then a lot of things come along with that. So the stress, then the debt, and then the figuring out the strategies to pay for it and still have a life and still have those things that you wish you had.
Well, and when you talk about debt, the U.S. is in debt. So happens, we're running such a huge debt to future generations.
Oh yeah, that's a big issue.
So
yeah.
so that's another issue. Yeah.
Well, I think part of that is that. There are just a lot of challenges out there, but you're talking about in the context, in the, in our society, culture here, that we're facing that on one level for the future, our kids, our grandkids, and their kids, and so forth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's happening now for individuals and families.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff going on. Let's go down our list a little bit more on this. It says millennials experience greater difficulty in securing a job that utilizes their degree than those of a similar age a decade ago.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I can't argue with that at all. And in fact, I really can't argue with any of the points made by Best Work. I think that their facts and their research are both very sound. It's the whole idea that you get a college degree and then you graduate and then you can't find work in that field. I think that's apt. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of stories about students graduating and then having to go back to school and getting additional graduate school or getting some other kind of certification, that kind of thing.
Right.
So the couple of the big issues that we've come up with, the idea of student debt, which is clearly it's a big issue, and the idea of underemployability. Well, if your debt's that high, then your expectations of income would be equally high, right?
Right.
And then the third thing, you can't find the kind of work that you felt like you trained to. So it sounds to me like at least two of the things we've talked about relate directly to what universities do. In other words, what can we do public policy-wise to curtail debt? And what can we do at the university level to start thinking about employability for students who graduate? And just to say we're going to teach some soft skills and teach some get-along skills and those kinds of things, I think the corporate world has different, they expect that, but they also expect students who come in ready, or graduates who come in ready to do something, to contribute to the bottom line in whatever the field is. So there could be a disconnect there.
Right. It seems like we're in this service economy, but also the technology economy too, and you end up in one of the others. Although I'm thinking there's just a lot of misconceptions that I think some of the younger folks may have. Okay, but I said it. But that they are going to move up the chain very quickly and be in the CEO, or they're going to find some sophisticated job that pays a lot of money when. Had they focused on it while they were in school? Did they get training specific to that job area? So it's a challenge both for the individual coming in the university, but the universities themselves to make sure that they're giving a product out that's going to help the person move to that job.
So you graduated with a four-year degree in psychology. I graduated with a four-year degree in English, right?
Okay.
And when you graduated from college, what kind of work did you do then?
Well, all right, you're asking a question here. I have an answer for that. Let me tell you that I had applied for jobs, and I heard two things. One, you are underqualified for this job.
Right.
To work with counseling, with clients and so forth in that way. But you're also overqualified for the other jobs that was available. So I got both of those, and ultimately, the long story short, we moved to North Carolina and went to graduate school, as you were talking about. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's tough, but here's another issue. I skipped over this one. I don't know if that was a Freudian slip or not, because this is a personal thing that's happening with me, is that problem number 6 on the list, it's becoming more common for millennials to live at home.
Yeah.
and
later and later.
True,
yeah.
by the way. In my case, a son who just graduated and he's at home. So, I think it's tough. But home ownership and finding an apartment, like the couple you talked about. I mean, those kind of things are. That's a difficult thing to make happen. All the ducks have to line up in a row.
Well, and then the home ownership thing may be out of the question if you've encumbered a huge college debt too. So
so let me, with that in mind, let me just jump to this one. This is problem 8. Millennials are less likely to be homeowners than young adults in previous generations.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling because I think that's all. Everyone has that idea. Not everyone, but most people have those ideas to have a home and so forth. And I'm looking around. We're in an area where there's a lot of building going on. There are homes and apartments, and people are trying to build residences. So I'm wondering how all this lines up. Somebody's buying those homes. Maybe it's the older generation moving around.
Well, the housing market's roaring. And again, all I can do is go back to the baby boomer experience because I think, maybe we're comparing this generation with a generation that came out of college during the 90s when the economy was roaring and the dot-com boom was happening and then the bubble burst. And the other thing, too, is the millennials have graduated from college in arguably the largest economic downturn since the Depression. And maybe some of the issues that are the unanticipated consequences of the 2007 economic downturn, we're still recovering from those, and some we may never recover from. It may just take another generation to develop the new technologies that create the next huge economic boom. Now, which doesn't let policymakers off the hook for some of the issues that graduates have now with going back to the whole idea of debt and maybe degrees that at one time the degree was a credential, it was currency. You've proven you're a finisher, so now somebody's going to take a risk on you, whereas today maybe not so much, and so maybe that's at the heart of several of these issues.
You may just have had more options for employment than you do now, or either it's more specific in certain ways. So it turns out that there's a fragility to this. And let's look at this idea here, and we'll wrap this up with the last 2 ideas, that millennials are financially fragile. And this is from a survey from the Washington Post that 63% of millennials have difficulty covering an unexpected $500 expense. Those kinds of things. And then finally, fewer and fewer millennials are becoming entrepreneurs. I find that one kind of surprising in a way because I really see this movement toward people starting their own business, coming up with ideas, partnering with people, and starting new businesses. At least in now I may have to refer to Pinker again or dig into the facts, but the idea is that's what I'm thinking that is occurring. More people are being entrepreneurs, but not so with the millennials.
So maybe again going back to policy and to education, is it time in education and also time for policymakers to take a look at where do we want to go, and then what kinds of things do we do to get there? Someone said to me, and this was, and I have a habit of going back. Well, when I graduated from college, we didn't have anything. Had to go back and I began a 25-year love affair with graduate school. I was constantly getting new degrees, and the list of them expanded depending on what I was doing at the time, right? But what was said to me was, well, just to survive today, you have to have the cell phone, you have to have a car, the old idea that you could get an apartment and rely on public transportation and go down to the payphone when you wanted to make a few phone, you can't survive. And these things all have costs. And so the costs in those terms are so much higher. I don't really know what to make of that. I don't think we'd all want to go back and give up our smartphones and give up our cars, but at the same time, maybe the time frame, the culture we lived in was easier on us at that age. So if that is in fact true, then like a lot of problems and issues and challenges, maybe it's time for a hard look at how to get to where we want to be. Is full employment at a job that is rewarding and makes plenty of money for everybody, is that a goal in this economy? Well, then how do we get there? Is having more entrepreneurs a goal? How do we get there? I know previous governments have set real goals and visions, and then we seem to find ways to attain those. So maybe that's where we are now.
Well, it does seem like, what you brought up for me is as you started with that, is the notion that it's cyclic. There's these cycles that we go through, and we can't always see what's on the horizon in terms of how we manage the problems and difficulties that we have now. But because I was thinking, we talked about this a while back, but the idea that there are more and more apps and exposure to meditation and mindfulness apps that remind you to put your phone down. The phone actually pops up a message on my phone that says, now's a good time to put your phone down. So I find that there's a lot of that going on. In other words, we're trying to find that space, that quiet zone that is a little away from the noisy crowd and all the expectations, all the things that are going on for us now, which I find is probably helpful because we have been tethered to the phones and the information, and we need to know everything that's going on right now, what's happened in other countries around the world even, that we find that on our phone immediately. We didn't have that in the past. So now we're more informed, but there has to be some way to sort of filter that and to make it healthy for us to be able to be informed and still have a life, a private life, a relaxed life, as well as the hard charging side of what we're facing. So.
Right. Well, if nothing else, then if this is sort of the lot of the millennial right now, then it really is time for a real discussion on how to, if it needs to be changed, how to change it and that kind of thing, because according to Pinker, the millennials are going to live a long time. I mean, just to see
I just pulled up, as you mentioned, Pinker here. This is his latest book, Enlightenment Now. I know you're reading it now.
Yeah.
The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. By the way, Bill Gates, my new favorite book of all time. So, okay, there's a quote. Everybody needs, you need that quote too.
Well, I think Pinker and Gates are besties. So,
that's what it was.
Yeah, they go to the same conferences.
Okay,
yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
That explains it. Well, I think one of the things that we're finding here, and his question in the book, and maybe you can kind of help me understand a little more about it, is the world really falling apart? Are we just inundated and overwhelmed by all of this But he's sort of taking a different look. Now, he's a cognitive scientist and intellectual that has written a number of books here, but he's presenting information that we don't often see in the news. You know, we see the chaos and the problems and the disasters, but he's presenting a very different view of where we're at. Maybe it's not so bad now.
Well, I think first you mentioned the news. I think that's we talked about that a little bit on our last conversation. The whole idea of communication, and how in the current mental health, I guess, landscape, you have access to so many things, but things we may not have thought of. Although, you know, we did think a good bit about Vietnam and in nuclear war, so we were worried about that. But I think what Pinker's point, I think ultimately where he's going with this book is that science has taken us from an era of untold violence, constant worry about illness, short expectation of longevity, the large majority of the world in abject poverty. That, I mean, famine-style poverty.
Right.
And in really I guess 100 years, that's been transformed by science. That would be his point. He says that beginning, and he shows all these graphs where you see an exponential growth in longevity, for instance, or a huge drop in fatal illnesses and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think what his point of view would be, and what he says, is that if you have issues, then ultimately do like the Apollo team did, throw everything on the table and figure out how do we address this issue with science. And that has been a proven improvement on an exponential and evolutionary level for humankind. At the same time, Pinker has a large number of detractors who say the exact opposite, that say that virtually every issue we have, climate change, inequity, stress, every one of those can be related to poorly thought out scientific innovations. So far from being someone who would say that, the Pinker's got all the answers, and that that these issues don't exist. I still think that that somewhere in the middle is maybe where we should go. You know, we talked about.
I think you're probably right about that.
We talked about maybe doing a segment on leadership.
Yes.
And something I've noticed, and I think in the leadership realm now, we sort of have two approaches, and one is sort of the autocratic approach where this is what we're going to do, and I have the power, so we're doing this. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the sort of ideological approach where I subscribe to, let's say I'm a follower of Steven Pinker, or I'm a follower of liberalism or conservatism or whatever ism is
a lot of
is
isms
invoked.
out there.
Yeah, a lot of isms. And in order, once you go down that road, you can't do the Apollo approach, which is to throw everything you've got in the space capsule on the table and say, how do we get these guys home using just what we have on the table? You have to lose your ego. You have to lose your ideology. You have to be willing to work with others and that kind of thing. And right. I think
absolutely,
maybe some of these issues for millennials require that kind of honest conversation and honest talk. And we can't always look to the past either, because it's a different era, different time, different challenges.
Yeah, I think if you listen to our last Got Therapy episode, Dan is talking a lot about that very issue, that you develop developmental path that you, and I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is that you're continually growing. You have a different mind now than you had before. He used the example, he has a 12-year-old son. Well, he's never been a father of a 12-year-old son until now, and he has to adjust his brain to that and the way he works with his son and communicates with him in such a way, because he's never been there before. But you can't go back, and I think his quote had something to do with going the good old days and going back to the past. That Freud actually said there's just no recoverable certainties, and I know I'm butchering that, but the idea is that you can't go home anymore because you're constantly moving and developing. I think another piece of this issue that you made me think about with this is that the complexity of it, our problems are becoming so I'm trying to figure out the right word, but they're small in comparison to some of the larger issues, that our thoughts about these issues, and this is also what we talked about as well, the thoughts about these issues that we have. Let's take, for example, recycling. And you recycle at home and you try to do these things, but that thought that you have, is it really helping and impacting the larger problem that we have? Well, why? Well, we're doing our little bit here, but aren't corporations responsible for more of that than the individual here at your house recycling things? That our thoughts sometimes doesn't match up with the bigger ways to solve the issue. So it may come to what you mentioned a minute ago, is learning how to work together, work as teams, looking at all the various resources that we have. The complexity of that gets us off the bigger topic sometimes, and then we're worried about some app on the phone, or we're worried about something minuscule in the bigger picture of things, and we're scattered in such a way that we don't have the cohesiveness of that group at NASA that said, okay, what do we have to fix this problem, put everything on the table. No, we're all siloed away into our little minute problems that we're working on, and it doesn't address the bigger issue. Well, I'm hoping that made sense. I just kind of
it really does. You made me think of several of the hot button issues now. One is climate change. One is for the U.S. immigration and immigration policy and that kind of thing. And just to take climate change, you have two schools of thought. One is to in the U.S., go all in on a really what amounts to an economic trip to the moon, totally transform how we do things economically. And then you have the other side, of course, where you can't do that, you're giving away the store. At the same time, a large, I guess, challenge for climate change is that the countries that are developing economies are really contributing way more to the carbon issue than the United States is, where actually the carbon emissions have dropped. So that's a level of complexity. Now we're a global economy, so that discussion can't be held unilaterally just in the United States. No more than you have or at least a couple of months ago, had an overwhelming surge of immigration at our southern border, and that we were unable to contend with. Well, again, unilaterally for the United States to make a decision and try to resolve that issue refuses to recognize that it's a complex issue that goes all the way to what's happening in South America. Yeah, and you know, one of the first answers was, well, Mexico needs to do better. Well, you have Mexico where that government's contending with the same issues we are, and the discussion needs to be broader and it needs to be more creative.
And more in depth too,
and
because
more in
I
depth.
think sometimes it's like we talked around here about the soundbite, and you get this, you receive the soundbite, and then that tells you everything you need to know. No, actually, it doesn't. It's just a soundbite in that moment, in that particular instant. Whereas you just, I think we're almost stuck in this surface level of understanding sometimes, and back to our original idea we talked about with education, you have to become the critical thinker and really think about these things in depth, look at the broad range of things, look at it more in depth, drill down, see what the research really says, find out what is correct about it, so that you can have a good opinion about it and make good choices for yourself. So it's the sound that reminded me of the soundbite idea. Just a couple of phrases that somebody said, meaning so much more. We tend to add on, and we'll fill any void. This is a human trait, I guess, with whatever we're thinking, and our belief system's already intact. And so, if it fits, Dan and I talked about confirmation bias over the weekend, and that notion that we only want to believe what fits with what we already believe. And so the idea of taking in new information and weighing things in a different way is difficult for people, absolutely, but it's worth it to examine our own thoughts and beliefs about things and question some things along the way. If you just take it at the surface level and say, well, that's all the information I need, you're going to miss out on a lot. I think it gets back to Pinker and his writings as well.
Yeah, well, it's a resilience strategy because things are going to change. And here's the other thing too, and you would know more about this than I would. The whole idea that we tend to leap to ideas. We tend to leap to opinions.
Right.
And then once we've
particularly from people that we value or we already have some belief in and hold to be credible,
or opinions that are consistent with an ideology we already have.
Right.
But once stated, that opinion becomes a matter of ownership.
Right. I think I know where you're going with
and
this.
And so then there's that calcification where you're unable to consider another opinion because ultimately that'll threaten you as an individual, because like if you're a fan of one university's football team, well, you're a diehard fan. I mean, you're just a fan, and that's the best football team. And even when it's bad, it's time to fire the coach.
Right.
There's, it's.
And by the way, I don't know, just to take a off on a branch here, but if you've talked to someone who is a diehard fan, and we have one in our family who's a Falcon fan, Atlanta Falcons.
Boy, it was a rough weekend for us. Yeah,
of course. And so when you talk about him, what about the other? He has no interest whatsoever in any other teams or other sports, by the way, too. So, yes, there's an entrenchment that happens there.
Yeah. So I think one of the strategies has to be ultimately for folks who are trying to resolve issues to listen to each other and to look at all the facts. Yeah. And then remember, we discussed that whole idea of reframing the facts, reorganizing the facts. Looked at one way, and you mentioned the Atlanta Falcons game. I watched part of that game until it just was too horrible.
Too hard to watch.
But here's the thing: there were two takeaways. One, as a fan, you could be frustrated and say, "How could all this money be spent and all this effort be put into this, and the team to really not perform very well?" But there's a whole other way to look at it, that maybe they're trying new things and it's just the cake's not ready yet. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can reframe, and I think to ultimately to really resolve issues, you got to do that. So,
well, I've enjoyed this conversation. First of all, I think we picked apart the millennial problems, at least according to our sources here, and we touched on some of the issues. It's tough for millennials, and we're finding out that we're learning about how we deal with problems as well, and maybe the comparison from Pinker about how well we're doing, and maybe we should be grateful for that and take a look at how we can solve these problems and put our heads together in a way to help solve some of these bigger problems and be open to new information. That seemed to be a theme today.
And I don't know if I did very well on the whole millennial issue. I mean, I may have gone with the whole back in the day concept. It was just as tough back in the day, but in thinking about it, you can't really compare the whole economic landscape and the cultural landscape of the late 60s, early 70s, which was when I was coming into that age.
Right.
You can't really compare that with what's happening this millennium.
No, we've never been here before.
That's right. We've never been here before.
That's it. And wow, some things from our past can really help us navigate these difficult situations. But other things, maybe not so. We can't rely on that past. I think you just said that. And the idea that, being open to learning, being, taking in new information and weighing that information, and let's move toward a good decision here as we move along.
The whole idea of beginner's mind, right?
Right. I think so. We got to talk about that some more. Well, Here we are. I'm just pulling this up on the screen. This is an episode we did. This is our first episode, and the only so-called expert that you could find happened to be me in that. So maybe we can wait till we really get an expert in here as well. Just want to invite people to take a look at our YouTube channel at Columbus Television. We put all of our videos, of course, Got Therapy, all those things online for you to kind of peruse through. We've been doing it for a while. So want to invite people in to take a look at some of the things that we're doing around here, and welcome anyone who wants to join us as well. Tom, this has been great. Thank you so much for this conversation today.
Always good to be down at Columbus Media Group here in First Avenue, Columbus, uptown, and always a pleasure.
All right, we'll see you next time.
And I've been taking jazz, so I can relate to it. It's really very unrewarding for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you'll get like an epiphany, and you'll go, I'm hearing that harmony that before you're looking at the music and you're going, what are they doing, that kind of thing,
Well, I don't read music, and I can't appreciate it on that level, but I can like what always struck me, and I started listening to jazz with free jazz because it connected with the punk and the noise and the death metal stuff that I was listening to. And
you were into some atonal like Cage
and
some of those.
Take
a bunch of pots and pans and roll them down the stairs.
I'm still a fan. But what struck me is it is so completely imminent and immersive. Like you can drop into a good jazz tune anywhere you want. It's never the same song. I can listen to one of those, particularly when he had his classic quartet, I can listen to that same song 100 times. It's never the same song.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to Garrison or I'm listening to Jones.
Right.
And as I get older, it makes more sense to me.
Right.
Like suddenly I'm like, I was too young, but now I'm getting it, Now I got the feel.
Wow, yeah.
And it's interesting because part of the parallel with, not that I'm by any means, but Coltrane was obsessed with a character named Doc Savage. And Doc Savage was a pulp hero from the 30s and 40s, 50s, up until the late 50s, and then he stopped. And I was a kid. I was obsessed with Doc Savage. And Doc Savage would get up every morning at 4 in the morning.
Oh.
And he would exercise, and he would read, and he would do 2 hours of body and mind training every morning. And Coltrane did the same thing. And I did the same thing. Literally, that's what started me this whole thing. I remember as a kid, okay, I gotta do whatever. And this obsessive focus on learning a skill and all that sort of stuff. Like, like you guys were talking about, like how you just sort of wandered into college and all that sort of stuff. In my experience from birth in the womb, as being an obsessive, neurotic bastard, there was always, I've got to get be the best at this. I have to be able to learn this. I have to be. It's like not like you were talking about playing ping pong. I think I may have played 3 ping pong games in my life.
Right.
And if I played ping pong,
but if it was online,
and if I played ping pong, I would play 750 hours a week of ping pong until I could be.
So you could be really great at it.
That's all I could do. Like when I started playing disc golf, like literally, there's a towel in my office, and I practice every day for hours on my form. That's what I do. That's what I. Till I can get it, okay, I got to be able to throw 400 feet. Got to be able to, okay, I got 400 feet. I got to be able to do this. So literally, when you talk about this stuff, I'm crazy.
Well, you're just not part of the slacker culture.
Well, I think it's a form.
Right.
I think it's a form of slacker because it keeps me away from maybe some other things.
Yeah.
There's a thing there
you
that
got the depth. It's the breadth of it.
Yeah, it's like my wife will be like, what is it? Well, the first time we hung out, and my wife regrets saying this. She'll try to take it back, but in a few minutes she goes, I wish you drank, because we could just be sitting there enjoying this, but I can tell. Like we were at Jarfly. She's sitting there, she's got a drink, and she's just hanging out. And she goes, "You look so intense," and I'm like, "Yeah, because I've been reading up on this some existential constructs, and I'm thinking about how to be able, but she's having a drink."
She's like, dial it back, bro.
And I'm like,
the game's on, the music's playing, whatever it is. It's like,
I'm like, wow. Like even like when somebody posted on, I'm a huge fan of this band called Wire. They're one of the first art punk bands from the '70s, and I'm obsessed with them, like everything. And so somebody posted online 3 weeks ago their favorite post 2000 Wire songs because they reformed and they've been, and so for the last 3 weeks I've been rehearsing in my mind with those 10. I keep going over, I can't be that one. So I go home, and if I have any time like this morning, when I go home at some point today, I'm gonna listen to a couple hours of Wire. I'm gonna go through there. That's a good one, but I don't know. But in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna have my list.
All right. So one of the things I know about that type of issue is there's no end. There's actually no goal that you reach and go, aha, whew, man, made it. No, it's the next thing that starts before the last one ends. So it's an ongoing chain, and I'm just adding that thought to the conversation.
Oh, I have a friend of mine. We went to school together, and she's a psychologist too. And she would say, I walk into a bookstore and I feel so overwhelmed that I'll never read those books.
Right.
And it really struck me because I walk into a bookstore and say, oh, thank God I'll never finish this. Because what would I do if I did?
That's it.
That's why, when I discovered Soulseek and I could steal any album, and you name the most obscure album ever made, and somebody on Soulseek has it because they're all obsessive bastards. And it's like I found the ocean. I'm like, man, I will never drink this. It will always be present for me in some form or fashion. And so,
it's about passion.
Okay, I'm fine with that because there's a lot of content if we're making podcasts. I mean, we never run out. All right, so that's a good thing. And on the other hand, okay, relaxing, being comfortable, be in the moment, let it go. We talked about mindfulness. We talked about relaxation. Just got kind of get off the grid, get to a place where you're comfortable, and this moment is great.
Yeah, there's a concept of a lived moment. And again, I'm an obsess over the lived moment.
I've asked you about this, by the way, over a period of time.
The vertices of the lived moment. And like I think there is a way to take the passion to there is a teaching embedded in Coltrane's music about how to exist and how to be present for the breath that you have, how to be present for the moment that you have no choice but to experience in some form or fashion. And you can bring that to bear on things. I mean that's not I mean it is when I say being driven that's certainly a thing that I am.
Well, the problem I think is that you don't let yourself relax and be in that moment because something else kind of kicks back in that you've got to do. You're sort of searching. And there's always something more out there.
But here's the thing, because I think that when you talk about the live moment, there's such a thing it's the imminent experience. And you guys may experience this with music, but I can have Part of the reason I've never done drugs is because I don't have to. If I really listen, and I don't like, I have a music room at home. It's a little bigger than this room. It's bigger than this room.
Okay.
And
we need to go to the studio then. Right
there is a, and there's no, it's just a stereo, and there are no chairs, because when I listen to music, I move. And so I literally can enter this sort of dervish space. And as I get older, it's a little harder, because the next day I feel like I've been hit by a truck. But I can be in that space. If Julie goes off to visit the in-laws and takes the kid, I can be in that space for 8-9 hours, and my mind is blown. Like I am literally, I am communing with God. I am in that space. And so with music, with the reading, if I don't know if you've probably had this experience where you've been literally floored by a sentence or a concept.
Sure.
And when it hits you, you have this moment of expansion, and like you just sort of set the thing down and you go, holy cow. And I assume that's what drugs are, because I've never drank or had a cup of coffee or done any mind-altering substance whatsoever. I'm basically Mormon, without the underwear. I mean, literally without the underwear, not just the fancy underwear, but no underwear at all. But
okay, that's too much information. And but I understand where you're going with that, because I think that's all right. So first of all, thank you for revealing some of the things.
That I'm not wearing
a
underwear.
lot of us have questions, but it's not about the underwear. But a lot of things about. Okay, so yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning, you get time to yourself. You're exploring so many things. You're constantly reading and updating things, and the shark in the ocean that never stops moving. But are you okay with that? Because that example you just gave was you just found that moment, and you could be there for 8 hours. You could just kind of immerse yourself in.
Well, our friends, I mentioned before, our Buddhist friends, they have that saying that if you only enjoy the meal but not the cooking of the meal or the washing of the dishes, you only have a third of a life. You have these moments of immanence because they carry over into even the moments of the mundane, and. So there is a way to hear a little bit of Coltrane playing, even standing in line, to get your Slim Jim in the 7-Eleven.
Okay,
so
you're bringing it way down now, but yeah.
But I think there is. I think there is a way to be present in those things. So it's not like I think I may be wrong in this, because I certainly can't. I don't have a bird's eye view of my own life, but I don't live for Saturday for that 8 hours. I think there is a way in which I can visit these spaces, but I carry them with me. They're not like, it's not like I don't, I think I'm pretty good at being alive. There's a famous quote by Winnicott, it's Winnicott's prayer, "Dear Lord, let me be alive when I die." And I think, even though there are, on an average week I put in a good 70 hours, there's still, I can stay alive and breathing during a good percentage of those. So maybe that's a thing.
And I've been taking jazz, so I can relate to it. It's really very unrewarding for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you'll get like an epiphany, and you'll go, "Oh, I'm hearing that harmony that I." Before you're looking at the music and you're going, "What are they doing?" That kind of thing.
Well, I don't read music, and I can't appreciate it on that level, but I can like what always struck me, and I started listening to jazz with free jazz because it connected with the punk and the noise and the death metal stuff that I was listening to. And
yeah, you were into some atonal like Cage and,
yeah,
and some of those.
Like
take a bunch of pots and pans and roll them down the stairs.
I'm still a fan. But what struck me is it is so completely immanent and immersive. Like you can drop into a good jazz tune anywhere you want. It's never the same song. I can listen to one of those, particularly when he had his classic quartet, I can listen to that same song 100 times. It's never the same song.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to Garrison or I'm listening to Jones.
Right.
And as I get older, it makes more sense to me.
Right.
Like suddenly I'm like, I was too young, but now I'm getting it, Now I got the feel.
Wow, yeah.
And it's interesting because part of the parallel with, not that I'm by any means, but Coltrane was obsessed with a character named Doc Savage. And Doc Savage was a pulp hero from the 30s and 40s, 50s, up until the late 50s, and then he stopped. And I was a kid. I was obsessed with Doc Savage. And Doc Savage would get up every morning at 4 in the morning.
Oh.
And he would exercise, and he would read, and he would do 2 hours of body and mind training every morning. And Coltrane did the same thing. And I did the same thing. Literally. That's that's what started me this whole thing. I remember as a kid, okay, I gotta do whatever. And this obsessive focus on learning a skill and all that sort of stuff. Like, you know, like you guys were talking about, like how you just sort of wandered into college and all that sort of stuff. In my experience from birth in the womb, as being an obsessive, neurotic bastard, there was always, I've got to get the best to be the best at this. I have to be able to learn this. I have to be. It's like not like you were talking about playing ping pong. You know, I think I may have played 3 ping pong games in my life.
Right.
And if I played ping pong,
but if it was online,
and if I played ping pong, I would play 750 hours a week of ping pong until I could be.
So you could be really great at it.
That's all I could do. Like when I started playing disc golf, like literally, there's a towel in my office, and I practice every day for hours on my form. That's what I do. That's what I. Till I can get it, you know, okay, I got to be able to throw 400 feet. Got to be able to, okay, I got 400 feet. I got to be able to do this. So literally, so when you talk about this stuff, I'm crazy.
Well, you're just not part of the slacker culture.
Well, I think it's a form.
Right.
I think it's a form of slacker because it keeps me away from maybe some other things. You know.
Yeah.
There's a thing there
you
that
got the depth. It's the breadth of it.
Yeah, it's like, you know, my wife will be like, what is it? Well, the first time we hung out, and my wife regrets saying this. She'll try to take it back, but she goes, you know, I wish you drank, because you know we could just be sitting there enjoying this, but I can tell. Like we were at Jarfly. She's sitting there, she's got a drink, and she's just hanging out. And she goes, "You look so intense," and I'm like, "Yeah, because I've been reading up on this some existential constructs, and I'm thinking about how to be able, you know." But she's having a drink.
She's like, dial it back, bro.
And I'm like, you know,
the game's on, the music's playing, whatever it is. It's like,
I'm like, wow, man. Like even like when somebody posted on, I'm a huge fan of this band called Wire. They're one of the first art punk bands from the 70s, and I'm obsessed with them, like everything. And so somebody posted online 3 weeks ago their favorite post 2000 Wire songs because they reformed and they've been, and so for the last 3 weeks I've been rehearsing in my mind with those 10. I keep going over, no, I can't be that one. So I go home, and if I have any time like this morning, when I go home at some point today, I'm gonna listen to a couple hours of Wire. I'm gonna go through there. You know, that's a good one, but I don't know. But in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna have my list.
All right. So one of the things I know about that type of issue is there's no end. There's actually no goal that you reach and go, aha, whew, man, made it. No, it's the next thing that starts before the last one ends. So it's an ongoing chain, and I'm just adding that thought to the conversation.
Oh, I have a friend of mine. We went to school together, and she's a psychologist too. And she would say, I walk into a bookstore and I feel so overwhelmed that I'll never read those books.
Right.
And it really struck me because I walk into a bookstore and say, oh, thank God I'll never finish this. Because what would I do if I did? You know,
that's it.
That's why, kind of, you know, when I discovered Soulseek and I could steal any album, and you name the most obscure album ever made, and somebody on Soulseek has it because they're all obsessive bastards. And it's like I found the ocean. I'm like, man, I will never drink this. It will always be present for me in some form or fashion. And so,
it's about
now,
passion.
Okay? I'm fine with that because there's a lot of content. If we're making podcasts, I mean, we never run out. All right, so that's a good thing. And on the other hand, okay, relaxing, being comfortable, be in the moment, let it go. We talked about mindfulness. We talked about relaxation. We just got kind of get off the grid, get to a place where you're comfortable, and this moment is great.
Yeah, there's a concept of a lived moment. And again, I'm an obsessed over the lived moment.
I've asked you about this, by the way, over a period of time.
The vertices of the lived moment. And you know, like I think there is a way to take the passion to there is a teaching embedded in Coltrane's music about how to exist and how to be present for the breath that you have how to be present for the moment that you have no choice but to experience in some form or fashion. And you can bring that to bear on things. I mean that's not I
Sure.
mean it is when I say being driven that's certainly a thing that I am.
The
but-
problem I think is that you don't let yourself relax and be in that moment because something else kind of kicks back in that you've got to do. You're sort of searching, and there's always something more out there.
But here's the thing, because I think that when you talk about the live moment, there's such a thing it's the imminent experience, and you guys may experience this with music, but I can have part of the reason I've never done drugs is because I don't have to. If I really listen, and I don't like, I have a music room at home. It's a little bigger than this room. It's bigger than this room.
Okay.
And
we need to go to the studio then. Right
there
away.
is a, and there's no it's just a stereo, and there are no chairs because when I listen to music I move, and so I literally can enter this sort of dervish space. And as I get older, it's a little harder because the next day I feel like I've been hit by a truck. But I can be in that space. If Julie goes off to visit the in-laws and takes the kid, I can be in that space for 8-9 hours, and my mind is blown. Like I am literally, I am communing with God. I am in that space. And so with music, with the reading, if I don't know if you've probably had this experience where you've been literally floored by a sentence or a concept.
Sure.
And when it hits you, you have this moment of expansion, and like you just sort of set the thing down and you go, holy cow. And I assume that's what drugs are, because I've never drank or had a cup of coffee or done any mind-altering substance whatsoever. I'm basically Mormon. Without the underwear. I mean, literally without the underwear, not just the fancy underwear, but no underwear at all. But
okay, that's too much information. And but I understand where you're going with that because I think that's all right. So first of all, thank you for revealing some of the things.
But I'm not wearing underwear.
A lot of us have questions, but it's not about the underwear. But a lot of things about. Okay, so yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning, you get time to yourself. You're exploring so many things. You're constantly reading and updating things, and the shark in the ocean that never stops moving. But are you okay with that? Because that example you just gave was you just found that moment and you could be there for 8 hours. You could just kind of immerse yourself in
our friends, I've mentioned before, our Buddhist friends, they have that saying that if you only enjoy the meal but not the cooking of the meal or the washing of the dishes, you only have a third of a life. You have these moments of imminence because they carry over into even the moments of the mundane. And so there is a way to hear a little bit of Coltrane playing, even standing in line, to get your Slim Jim in the 7-Eleven.
Okay,
so
you're bringing it way down now, but yeah.
But I think there is. I think there is a way to be present in those things. So it's not like I think I may be wrong in this because I certainly can't. I don't have a bird's eye view of my own life, but I don't live for Saturday for that 8 hours. I think there is a way in which I can visit these spaces, but I carry them with me. They're not like, it's not like I don't, I think I'm pretty good at being alive. There's a famous quote by Winnicott, it's Winnicott's prayer, "Dear Lord, let me be alive when I die." And I think, even though there are, on an average week I put in a good 70 hours, there's still, I can stay alive and breathing during a good percentage of those. So maybe that's a thing.
And I've been taking jazz, so I can relate to it. It's really very unrewarding for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you'll get like an epiphany, and you'll go, "Oh, I'm hearing that harmony that I." Before you're looking at the music and you're going, "What are they doing?" That kind of thing.
Well, I don't read music, and I can't appreciate it on that level, but I can like what always struck me, and I started listening to jazz with free jazz because it connected with the punk and the noise and the death metal stuff that I was listening to. And
yeah, you were into some atonal like Cage and,
Yeah,
and
like-
some of those.
I
You
still
know,
like
take a
that
bunch
stuff.
of pots and pans and roll them down the stairs.
I'm still a fan. But what struck
Love
me
it.
is it is so completely imminent and immersive. Like you can drop into a good jazz tune anywhere you want. It's never the same song. Like I can listen to one of those, particularly when he had his classic quartet, I can listen to that same song 100 times. It's never the same song.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to Garrison or I'm listening to
Right,
Jones.
right.
And as I get older, it makes more sense to me.
Right.
Like suddenly I'm like, man, I was too young, but now I'm getting it, Now I got the feel.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting because part of the parallel with, not that I'm by any means, but Coltrane was obsessed with a character named Doc Savage. And Doc Savage was a pulp hero from the
Right,
30s and 40s,
right.
50s, up until the late 50s, and then he stopped. And I was a kid. I was obsessed with Doc Savage. And Doc Savage would get up every morning at 4 in the morning.
Oh.
And he would exercise, and he would read, and he would do 2 hours of body and mind training every morning. And Coltrane did the same thing. And I did the same thing. Literally, that's that's what started me this whole thing. I remember as a kid, okay, I gotta do whatever. And this obsessive focus on learning a skill and all that sort of stuff. Like you guys were talking about like how you just sort of wandered into college and all that sort of stuff. In my experience from birth in the womb, as
Unfortunately.
being an obsessive neurotic bastard, there was always, I've got to get the best to be the best at this. I have to be able to learn this. I have to be. It's like not like you were talking about playing ping pong. I think I may have played 3 ping pong games in my life.
Right.
And if I played ping pong,
But if it was online,
and if I played ping
there you
pong,
go.
I would play 750 hours a week of ping pong until I could be.
So you could be really
Right,
great at it.
That's all I could do. Like when I started playing disc golf, like literally, there's a towel in my office, and I practice every day for hours on my form. That's what I do. That's what I. Till I can get it,
Okay.
okay, I got to be able to throw 400 feet. Got to be able. Okay, I got 400 feet. I got to be able to do this. So literally, when you talk about this stuff, I'm crazy.
Well, you're just not
that's
part of
a-
the slacker culture.
Well, I think it's
yeah,
a
that's
form.
right.
I think it's a form of slacker because it keeps me away from maybe some other things.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
thing there
You
that
got the depth. It's the breadth of it.
Yeah, it's like my wife will be like, what is it? Well, the first time we hung out, and my wife regrets saying this. She'll try to take it back, but when she meant, she goes, I wish you drank, because we could just be sitting there enjoying this, but I can tell. Like we were at
Here we go.
Jarfly. She's sitting there, she's got a drink, and she's just hanging out. And she goes, "You look so intense," and I'm like, "Yeah, because I've been reading up on this some existential constructs, and I'm thinking about how to be able, like she said, but she's having a drink,
She's like, dial it back, bro.
and I'm like,
The game's on, the music's playing, whatever it is. It's like,
I'm like, wow. Man. Like even like when somebody posted on, I'm a huge fan of this band called Wire. They're one of the first art punk bands from the '70s, and I'm obsessed with them, like everything. And so somebody posted online 3 weeks ago their favorite post 2000 Wire songs because they reformed and they've been. And so for the last 3 weeks, I've been rehearsing in my mind with those 10. I keep going over, I can't be that one. So I go home, and if I have any time like this morning, when I go home at some point today, I'm going to listen to a couple hours of Wire. I'm going to go through there. That's a good one, but I don't know.
I don't know.
But in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have my list.
All right. So one of the things I know about that type of issue is there's no end. There's actually
Right.
no goal that you reach and go, aha, whew, man, made it. No, it's the next thing that starts before the last one ends. So it's an ongoing chain, and I'm just adding that thought to the conversation.
Oh, I have a friend of mine. We went to school together, and she's a psychologist too. And she would say, I walk into a bookstore and I feel so overwhelmed that I'll never read those books.
Right.
And it really struck me because I walk into a bookstore and say, oh, thank God I'll never finish this. Because what would I do if I did?
That's it.
That's why,
the kind of
when I discovered Soulseek and I could steal any album, and you name the most obscure album ever made, and somebody on Soulseek has it because they're all obsessive bastards. And it's like I found the ocean. I'm like, man, I will never drink this. It will always be present for me in some form or fashion. And so,
Well,
about
now,
passion.
okay, I'm fine with that because there's a lot of content if we're making podcasts. I mean, we never run out. All right, so that's a good thing. And on the other hand, okay, relaxing, being comfortable, be in the moment, let it go. We talked about mindfulness. We talked about relaxation. Just got kind of get off the grid, get to a place where you're comfortable, and this moment is great.
Yeah, there's a concept of a lived moment. And again, I'm going to obsess over the lived moment.
I've asked you about this, by the way, over
the vertices of the lived moment. And like I think there is a way to take the passion to there is a teaching embedded in Coltrane's music about how to exist and how to be present for the breath that you have, how to be present for the moment that you have no choice but to experience in some form or fashion. And you can bring that to bear on things. I mean that's not I mean it is when I say being driven that's certainly a thing that I am.
Well, the problem I think is that you don't let yourself relax and be in that moment because something else kind of kicks back in that you've got to do. You're sort of searching. And there's always something more out there.
But here's the thing, because I think that when you talk about the live moment, there's such a thing it's the imminent experience. And you guys may experience this with music, but I can have part of the reason I've never done drugs is because I don't have to. If I really listen, and I have a music room at home. It's a little bigger than this room. It's bigger than this room.
Okay.
And
we need to go to the studio then. Right
there it's just a stereo, and there are no chairs because when I listen to music, I move. And so I literally can enter this sort of dervish space. And as I get older, it's a little harder because the next day I feel like I've been hit by a truck. But I can be in that space. If Julie goes off to visit the in-laws and takes the kid, I can be in that space for 8-9 hours, and my mind is blown. Like I am literally, I am communing with God. I am in that space. And so with music, with the reading, if I don't know if you've probably had this experience where you've been literally floored by a sentence or a concept.
Sure.
And when it hits you, you have this moment of expansion, and like you just sort of set the thing down and you go, holy cow. And I assume that's what drugs are because I've never drank or had a cup of coffee or done any mind-altering substance whatsoever. I'm basically Mormon. Without the underwear. I mean, literally without the underwear, not just the fancy underwear, but no underwear at all. But
okay, that's too much information. And but I understand where you're going with that because I think that's all right. So first of all, thank you for revealing some of the things.
But I'm not wearing underwear.
A lot of us have questions, but it's not about the underwear. But a lot of things about. Okay, so yeah, 4:00 in the morning, you get time to yourself. You're exploring so many things. You're constantly reading and updating things, and the shark in the ocean that never stops moving. But are you okay with that? Because that example you just gave was you just found that moment and you could be there for 8 hours. You could just kind of immerse yourself in
it. Our friends, I've mentioned before, our Buddhist friends, they have that saying that if you only enjoy the meal but not the cooking of the meal or the washing of the dishes, you only have a third of a life. You have these moments of imminence because they carry over into even the moments of the mundane. And so there is a way to hear a little bit of Coltrane playing, even standing in line, to get your Slim Jim in the 7-Eleven.
Okay,
so
you're bringing it way down now, but yeah.
But I think there is. I think there is a way to be present in those things. So it's not like I think I may be wrong in this because I certainly can't. I don't have a bird's eye view of my own life, but I don't live for Saturday for that 8 hours. I think there is a way in which I can visit these spaces, but I carry them with me. They're not like, it's not like I don't, I think I'm pretty good at being alive. There's a famous quote by Winnicott, it's Winnicott's prayer, "Dear Lord, let me be alive when I die." And I think, even though there are, on an average week I put in a good 70 hours, there's still, I can stay alive and breathing during a good percentage of those. So maybe that's a thing. When you work with someone in therapy, they often come to you. They are condemned to the life that they have. They are stuck. They are patient I hadn't seen in a long time suddenly came back into my office, and I hadn't seen him about 6 years, and they were just telling me stories of being just series of god awful life choices, and I could sort of see, like, and as they're telling me this, I'm like, holy cow, man, this is heavy. And so for a moment I get lost with them, the despair of this chain of events that they've intentionally or unintentionally been part of. You allow yourself to be in despair with them in that moment, but then you hear Coltrane playing. You're aware that there's something, and that allows me to keep at least one toe on the bank to maybe help them come a little closer to the shore. Okay. We'll see how it goes, because that's just our first session in a while, but good gravy.
No, we talked about the idea of the participant and observer, the 1 foot on the bank, 1 foot in the stream, how important that is for therapy and the conversation and the movement in therapy. So you're able to do that. Well, this has sort of been an organic start for our podcast today, because we do.
I think we should call this with the podcast where you've been hacked. We got hacked.
Yes, we did. Yes, that's right. And before this is over, I've got to move a camera, so we're going to have a little technical break here in just a second. But it's always good to have. Dr. Rose needs an audience, and so sometimes the audience have won today. We got the upper echelon right in here today.
Yeah,
so.
we got. If we could just take the cruise here.
The cruise has been here. I
That's
sent
right.
you the picture of the cruise in the studio.
I can tell, I can tell, I can feel his
Although
presence.
there's some trouble brewing, so I want to be careful about how that goes.
There's trouble?
Yeah, well, you're going to start something. I can tell you right
I can
now.
feel, I can feel that that his presence, it's like he sort of bends space and time wherever he is, and I can feel that curve, There's a cruise curve going on.
And the good thing is he can explain it to you.
He could, yeah.
Exactly
he could.
what you're saying there.
Yeah.
So that's always good. Looking forward to him. Matter of fact, I think we're on the books for next Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. The cruise will be in the studio.
Well, what is he going to talk about? What's he going to say? It's going to be...
What is the
Well,
topic?
we're going to grill the expert.
Oh,
And
that's right.
The questions that lay people like Mike and Tom want.
I heard about that. This is really intriguing. So, what sort of questions do you ask an expert?
Okay, so for a in quantum physics, for instance. What's up with that dead cat? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I like that.
There was a couple other ones, like what was the one you came up with, Mike? You came up with one that was out there.
I first mentioned aliens, for example. The idea that there are 100 billion galaxies. There are 100 billion stars in each of those galaxies, all having planets revolving around. Why haven't we heard from someone yet? Or maybe we have. If you listen to the last Joe Rogan podcast with Dan Aykroyd, okay,
that guy
be careful there.
He may have taken a turn. I've heard about that. Well, one of the questions I'd ask him is how come astrophysicists get more chicks than Sinatra? What is the deal with that?
Okay, well we can put that on the agenda to talk
Ask
about.
him about that,
coming
like,
up, man. Maybe just send in some viewer questions, and then
that guy. That guy's got he's got more notches on his belt than I don't know, Tiny Tim. What? Speaking
all right,
of,
so
what
here we
sort
are.
of questions would you ask a psychologist?
Well, the first thing I would ask about this mindfulness concept.
You would.
So many people are really, as you say, they're focused on I'm a prisoner of my life. Mm-hmm. So if you're the prisoner, maybe you hold a key. How does all that work? That would be if I came to you and I said all these forces are impinging on me, and I can't seem to get unstuck. My relationships are bad. My job is not happening for me. Help me, Mr. Wizard.
That's a tough one, man. And I'd say retire.
Hey, and retarement's awesome, by the way, bro.
It's about retirement. All good. Maybe I'll make something to work for.
Maybe I'll make it.
On the other hand, you, my friend, retired doesn't seem to fit. I'm just going to say, given what we've just learned about you,
I might. Yeah, it's not.
That's a fixed point in time. We're not moving toward that. It's going to be a progress.
What's funny? One of my mentors, he just retired. He was one of the first psychoanalysts I knew in my program, and he's 91.
All right, there you go.
And I think he had a private practice and was teaching up until the age of 90.
Wow.
So,
all right, let's
you
keep
know,
that. Yeah, I mean that's a potential. We are living longer, and so that he's
Yeah, I
making
think,
use
yeah.
of that kind of thing.
I think he did. You know, I think the reason he retired was because his meth habit. I think it finally
Okay,
finally
there you
took
go.
its toll.
See, that's why that's exactly that statement right there. And Sean Cruzen, the Cruise, coming in the studio with those kind of questions.
That guy needs a meth habit. I'm just saying, that guy needs meth. If anybody, I normally wouldn't say that to someone, but you know, man, I think he needs a drug habit. I wouldn't.
All right, we are so off the rails today, but at the same time, like we said, it's organic. We're kind of moving towards something
it is.
here.
Well,
we talked about several different things. You want to kind of go on any of those topics that you just brought
I'm
up?
intrigued by a couple of things because, you know, Hackett has the 5 questions for experts, and I felt that, you know, I don't think I qualify as an expert in any way, but I would at some point like to hear those 5 questions because I would like, you know, I just want to know like what would be, you know.
Well, the first thing, Mike and I have to go to the panel of experts. We have the panel of experts that devises the questions for the experts.
Is this the chicken and biscuit place downstairs?
Brewster's Ice Cream is the last
Actually,
time
yeah, the last one was outside Brewster's Ice Cream. Just whoever's at Brewster's. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well that.
Yeah, these questions dubious at best, a little sketchy is what somebody said.
Okay, it's like
so. It's just the way it is. Right
my
now.
luck, you get if you were to ask me, you get my questions mixed up with the adult film star that you were going to interview. So suddenly I'm asked questions like, you know, like, what is it with that gag reflex? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know.
See, this is. I'm glad Dr. Hackett is getting to observe and to understand what I have to go through to get a podcast out on the World Wide Web.
So you know, one of the questions we asked,
but hey, we keep doing it for some reason. So,
the first Grill the Expert, we grilled Mike, and since Mike was on the grill, he couldn't grill himself.
Remember the movie Reluctant Astronaut with Don Knotts? Okay, that was
I remember that.
That was where I was at. As
you did a movie with a talking fish. Remember that one?
Oh, please.
But
one of the worst. But still, we like Don Knotts.
The questions we did, or that the panel of experts came up with for Mike, revolved around the idea that, okay, we're in a new millennium. What are the mental health issues in this millennium that may be different from previous times? And then second, we went to the idea of, okay, so what are strategies for dealing with those issues? So that's the kind of thing we came up with, but we had very specific questions, you know.
Well, see, we talked about that, the idea that the Gutenberg mind versus the digital mind.
Yes.
And that
matter of fact, I pulled some of the stuff we talked about from that. You see, that's why these things kind of help and come together sometimes.
Because the idea that like when my son, just an example, it's like my son is he plays League of Legends. And by the way, CSU now has a League of Legends team. It's like that's like a campus sport.
Oh, is that one of the things? Okay.
So,
I get it.
And he's saying, "Tim, this character, I got this character. This character's so cool. Let me show you the character, how cool he is. You know, or how cool the character is." He kept saying, "Cool, how cool the is."
Right.
So I go up and he says, "This is the character, and it's a female character.
Right.
It's a woman. Oh, look how cool she is. She's on it." I'm thinking, when I was his age, I couldn't do that. I couldn't have chosen a female character.
No,
I couldn't. I would have. I mean, I could have thought it, but I couldn't have expressed it. And could I have said it to my dad? Now, my dad probably was pretty cool, and he was a liberal commie, so probably he would have been more than okay with it. But if he only could see me now. But I think that notice how the very fabric, the web of culture has changed. So you know that there has been a movement, and my mind is different than his. It already is. Like he has, he is a digital native. He has a digital mind. He can think. When he's trying to teach me how to play one of the games, like the keyboard to him is a different thing. To me, it is simply a word processing and so you can literally see the shift and the change. And since I do a lot of work with adolescents in my private practice, you know, they force me to move out of my Gutenberg, you know, book sort of way of thinking about things into, and you can often tell the difference between other therapists. Like if you're going to work with folks within, I work with a lot of college students too. You're forced to be able to think but I still will not have the mind that he does. So when you talk about what are the mental health issues we have to face, one thing is you can't go back. We can't.
No.
And again, not to get political, but our current president kept saying, "Let's make America great again." And I think a part of what drove the folks who voted for him is the sheer terror of realizing that, first off, there never was the America you want to go back to. It's
Right.
it's what we call après-coup in psychoanalytic thought. It's retroactive reconstruction. No lost certainties can be found, but by the sheer terror of the fact that we have been replaced, and we are slowly but surely being replaced. I will not be able to compete in the world that my son is being formed for, and that's a scary thing. No.
I think so. And we talked about some of this with our podcast with Tom about the coping skills and the way to sort of take a break from all of the chaos that is going on. And so, these basic counseling skills as well, where you have some empathy, you develop the ability to see it from another person's point of view, but also you're authentic. You're trying to be who you are. And I think that's the way we led off this conversation today. So it seems to permeate a lot of things that we talk about. And I'm down with that. But I think, and you mentioned too, Dan, just to say that this is a progressive thing. It's what's before, it's during, it's after. It's a chain of events to be truly aware and in the moment, as we talked about so many times.
And think about what you said there with the in the moment. You mentioned the mindfulness. I think at its core, and there's a philosopher named, I've mentioned him before, Slavoj Žižek. Žižek.
By the way, some of the most interesting videos out there and talks out on the internet is Žižek, because you will not predict what he's going to say next.
No, in fact, he is of the left, but he is one of the most offensive and politically incorrect people you will ever encounter. Willfully so.
Yeah. But makes sense and comes around. If you listen to him long enough, he brings it around, and you got to go, oh yeah, I get that now. Okay, I got
but
that. Yeah.
His take on mindfulness is that in a way, mindfulness, at least what he calls it Western Buddhism, and the Western Buddhism practice of mindfulness, is in some ways the most inauthentic practice available. Because the goal of Western mindfulness is just to be able to get you to lower your anxiety enough so you can continue to be a cog in the wheel, right?
Right.
So you continue to buy, continue to work, and not question the fact that the anxiety that you're attempting to still through mindfulness is actually a reflection of your sanity. You should be feeling the things you're feeling, and the moment that you're trying to move into is not the real moment. And this notion that in some ways mindfulness, if we're not careful, will turn us into capitalist zombies. We will work and we will spend, and we will not ask ourselves, what is this anxiety we're experiencing about?
You know, some of the things, I mean, there's a part of it too that we buy into, that we accepted as a result of being in this society, and we are a cog in the wheel, although we like to demonstrate our independence and our individuality. But there's something very important about what he's saying there, that we need to be aware of that and decide what we're going to do about it, if we do anything.
Well, when you say what we're going to do, because one of the things that Hackett said there is that if somebody comes in and they say that, look, I've got all these things going on, all these conflicts in my life, all this, I want all this changed. Well, the goal is, one thing is to be able to say that, actually, no, the conflicts that you have are the life you have. You don't want to, if you untie the knot, then you may have nothing at all. You do this sometimes in couples work. Couples, I have this spiel where I always say, couples don't have fights, they have one fight. And our goal is to name the fight you have. And the goal is not to stop that fight, because if we untie that knot, we untie the marital knot. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to be able to have some understanding so this conflict can move you forward. You should get better at it. It's not that it should stop.
Right.
And that, I think there's something, mindfulness, if we're not careful, and some of the quick fixes that we have are aimed at. I mean, you know, I'm not a huge fan of CBT. You know.
Okay.
Now that's not the oil. That's CBD, right? That's
Yeah.
okay.
Here we
I'm a
go.
huge fan
I'm
of
glad
that.
you clarified all of that.
I'm a huge fan
right.
because, you know, every night before I go to bed, a bathtub of CBD oil. I'll just sort of lower myself into it.
But not cognitive behavioral therapy.
I would never do
Okay,
that, but I would
that-
the bathtub
okay,
full of
there you go.
CBD, just sort of float. If I could have a swimming pool of CBD, we'd have a party. We'd all just kind of. But how would that end?
With the police? I don't know. That doesn't sound right.
That's
But
probably-
yeah, okay.
So I'm not.
But
I'm
the
not,
point.
The point, there was a point somewhere. I'm not a fan of CBT, partly because I am, as you know, I supervise a bunch of folks.
Yes.
I supervise burgeoning psychologists and counselors and therapists. So they're
Who may
on their.
be CBT.
They're often very
people
young,
as well.
and
So, yeah,
their
there you
programs
go.
often sort of do this, and so often
Until you
when-
convert them, I might say.
I
So,
try to, and
having-
usually
having
conversion
worked
involves, you know,
with
it's you ever you know what trepanning is? You put the hole in the head. That's how.
Oh yeah,
that's
that
how I
was
do
a
it.
while
Just-
back.
So, yeah,
Okay.
we had the
we don't
ancient
do that
Mayans
anymore.
used to do a lot of that trepanning sort of thing.
Okay.
It's not a, yeah, but
Yeah.
so they come in and they'll often and I'll see this where, you know, like, and I'll watch a video of one of their tapes here.
Right.
I'll often see an instance where I don't know about you,
Yep. There we go.
but there's this famous saying by one of my men Wilfred Bion. I've talked about him before too.
I bet we have.
Yeah, and he says, anytime two people meet, an emotional storm is created. So his basis is that even among friends, there is always a disturbance in your internal world the minute someone comes close enough to you for it to be considered an encounter, like the way the moon affects the tides, right? So there's always this emotional storm. And we have a reflexive, automatic way of being able to navigate this. You know, the Earth doesn't have to think the moon's already there. And the goal is what we do with that. And as therapists, oftentimes the way they answer that initial impact of the person walking in and sitting in their office is to reach for a worksheet.
The most.
Okay, let's do this, right?
I've actually been in that situation supervising when the person left the room to get a worksheet.
That's right, yeah.
And the couple
And they
was-
never came back, even though they had the
Well,
worksheet.
it took a long time. They must have had a Xerox copy maybe or something. But the couple they were crying in the session when the person went for the worksheet. Well, worst example, but yes, I
But that's
exactly
a
know
beautiful
what you mean.
example of how they are mediating that emotional storm, and there are ways to do that in an authentic manner that generates the very impact that could be healing, right? Like you can tell when somebody is sitting across from you and they are literally waiting on the next thing they're going to say, right?
Right.
That would be a wonderful example of inauthentic. But if you're in the presence of somebody who's open and you can tell they're actually listening to you,
Sure.
that in of itself is a healing thing, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing too. I mean, I don't think we often get that
Right.
in our hustle bustle society and
Well,
chaos.
I'll
that
tell
we
you,
have
occasionally when my wife overdoes her Xanax, I get that. I come home, you know, she drools a little, but I can tell she's listening. You know.
now. Let me just we'll have Julianne at some point, and she'll
Yes.
clear up all of these
She will.
misconceptions.
Well, here's
about
what she'll
her,
say.
but-
She said, the reason I need the Xanax is I'm married to this bastard. You know how many Xanax?
Now
it
that
takes
part,
to get-
I think I understand.
it takes to get through
Absolutely,
this.
yes. Well, you bring up some interesting ideas too, and I think sometimes the behaviorist, not only the cognitive behaviors, but the behaviors themselves, are really talking about how to end something, a bad behavior, how to
That's right,
how to
yeah.
stop something. So, not just lower anxiety, but get rid of anxiety. So we know that they're marching in the wrong direction.
I was trained.
there, for sure.
Nate Azrin, he was one of the, because I was into behaviorism. The reason I went to my program that I went to was Nate Azrin was there. And he's the guy who helped invent token economy. And this
Got it.
guy was like one of the foremost behaviorists on the planet. And I remember him giving a lecture, and he's saying that anger is a bad thing. And that if you can have an anger-free life, it means you're healthy. And I remember thinking to myself, like, boy, that sounds kind of... But it is. It's all about that anger is sign that there's a behavior that you need to extinguish.
Right. I mean,
Or you need
the
to,
whole regime, if you think about it, is from the learning perspectives, from the learning theories, that we count, we somehow quantify, and we're marching down from 10 to 1 to 0. And it happens all the time in psychotherapy.
Here's the thing, though, because I was the graduate assistant for the program and his main graduate assistant. I really think I broke him on this anger thing. I really think hanging out with me enough. I think he really at some point was like, because just my mere presence toward the end, he would.
My question is that going to happen to me and Dr. Hackett?
I think it's already happened. Right now,
it's too late now. Okay, there
all
we go.
this suppressed rage, you're like, God. Like after you guys are going to start drinking after this. You're going to go down to find I don't know. Is the loft open at this point?
Is there anything to drink around here now? Is my question. It's kind of an interesting.
Apple teenies. You guys look like guys who would really enjoy a good, like a bucket of apple teenies.
I think that's an insult.
Yeah, we'd probably just go down to pluck chicken and have a chicken sandwich.
Okay, that will give you. All right,
that would do it for us.
Dr. Hackett's fighting back right now, so he knows you're a vegan. So here we go.
Was that a shot across the bow? That was a meat shot across the bow.
Get your attention.
Which, by the way, I had a vegan slider last night at a local restaurant. Can we say the restaurant's name? Can we say the Jar Flies? You like that Jar Flies?
Sure, you
can. Have you been there?
We've done things.
It was actually quite.
Actually, we need sponsors for this program.
They should sponsor Beyond. It was a Beyond Burger slider. I really enjoyed that. You know what? They're small. How many? You know how many I had? 42.
No, that's not true. But see, I have to quickly call you on these things, because if I let them stay just silence afterwards, people go, "Oh, really? 42? That seems like a lot." No, none of that's real. Okay, I'm just saying.
I'm Irish.
All right. All right. So, what were we talking about?
I think we were talking about authenticity. Inauthenticity. We're talking about the idea of the lived moment. I think on some level, your question was saying, "Look, I've just heard a great deal about the behavior of this really obnoxious, obsessive bastard. Surely this must be hell." And you were trying to say, I think you were trying to do the intervention. You were trying to say, how do we get you to live in the moment, man? Whatever.
Well, I know. No, it was just a reflective. I wasn't trying to do any work on you.
Okay.
I've tried that before, and nothing's happened. So
anytime I go looking for a therapist, they would be like, "No, man, I've already heard stories. No, I don't need this."
No. I can imagine the rest of the therapists in town, if you were to call for an appointment, I mean, they'd probably close their practice. I don't know for sure, but
they would hand me a hammer. Just hit me in the head with this a couple of times. Let's get this over with.
But I'm fascinated about the topics that we talked about so far. I'm fascinated about you in certain ways, but this is not necessarily a podcast about you, but you certainly have an influence on some things that we're talking about here. But yeah, and I don't think I was really trying to do an intervention, but I just want to know more. In other words, okay, if you do, and we talked about Malcolm Gladwell just the other day with if you want to be an expert.
I thought you were going to go with Malcolm X, but Malcolm Gladwell.
No, that's coming up on the schedule. But for the most part, 10,000 hours of practice if you want to be an expert. And somewhere ingrained in you is that if I'm interested in something, I gotta get my 1,000. I've got to start doing that.
Well, it works like this, and this is I was really trying to get into. I decided at one point I was going to get into Beethoven, and. I don't know if you ever go on the Pirates Bay. I assume it's still there because Soulseek. I got in trouble with a couple of lawyers, so I don't visit Pirates Bay anymore.
Okay.
That's a true story. But I went on the old Pirates Bay, and you could literally find they had compiled 62 different conductors with 62 different symphonies. It may not all have been different symphonies of each of Beethoven's symphonies. And so I stole it. And so I would spend Beethoven's first or second. I went through all of them, and I would listen to weeks on end of the same symphony just by the different. I would listen to it over and over again.
Okay, hold on just a second. All right. I'm glad you put that out there. Let's just take a breath.
It gets worse.
Take a policy. And so the idea for you. I mean, my first thought was, okay, you really want to drill down and look at the comparisons between how this music is going to go. But so explain yourself, sir.
There's a crunchy style. There were Mahler came along and added a bunch of stuff, and so there's the romantic interpretation of Beethoven's symphonies. There are all these different, and based on when the conductor was born, their influences, there was a return to what would be known as, that's the crunchy style, the classic, like with classic instruments and pared down, all that sort of stuff. So all these sorts of stuff that you get. And in the meantime, I probably read every single Beethoven biography and study. There's even there's one book by a psychoanalyst on Beethoven. I read that twice. And so, in the midst of all this, so I'm going on and on. And my wife, at some point, she said,
Let me just say, thank God for Julie in so many ways.
She
Okay,
said,
go ahead.
if I have to hear one more,
To the moon.
that is literally, can we hear some music with words? How about that? And so I haven't got to the ninth. That's got some vibrato. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it to the ninth.
You're not going to make it. Your marriage is not going to make it to the
That's
night.
what she said. I can't. I can't. So and my point of saying this is that I got a point, maybe just to show how
Right.
ridiculous I can be, I guess. But
I know.
the idea is that there is, like I said, there is a core, there is a depth, there is a way to, I don't have, like I can't read music, but even if you can't read music, people have come up with pictographs of Beethoven scores, and I've got those too, and I would occasionally try to look at them while I was listening to the music, so I'd have some sense of placement of instruments and his notions of tonality and his compositional choices. I'd attempted that too, but
Yeah. Hey, can I interject something? If I were to interrupt that, you were going through that, or your wife Julie at the house would say, "Hey, honey, how about this?" Or, "Hey, Dan, what about the? Could you?
Yeah,
Could you respond to that?
I do.
Or say, "Hey, no, I'm
But
no
these
talking.
would be
I'm
times when
focused."
when people were when in the morning when everybody's asleep, or
Okay,
I would
all
be. They would often be when I was doing something, or I had at that point I didn't have a music room at that point. Maybe I did. At some point in this, I had a music room.
Okay, all right.
so
I
I
didn't
would-
mean to,
I would
I
go
didn't
down
mean to
there,
take us
but
off
yeah.
on that, but
Well, that's his intervention. You're trying to see if this was taking the place of human interaction, if it was somehow impacting.
Oh yeah, and also kind of being in that moment and being able to kind of move with with what's happening in that time frame. But what you're saying is that you set aside that time to
Yes, just,
indulge.
and the
Is
idea
it an indulgence though? I mean, is
Well,
it this?
It goes back. We talked about Doc Savage. I don't know if that was on the thing, but the idea behind it is that it's like lifting weights. So it's like an aesthetic lifting of weights. It's like a way of placing something, a burden in your path that you can grow from in a way. And so even if I were listening to those Beethoven things, I would still think about how do they connect with whatever philosophical discourse I might be engaged in, or how does it connect with the work that I do. And
Oh, yeah.
that's why I think when I discovered some of the books where they were sort of talking about how there's a mysterious letter that Beethoven wrote that some people considered a suicide note that he never actually did. But and if I remember correctly, he scratched out, or he just you didn't have. I think at some point, maybe I'm wrong about this, he could no longer write his father's name, and so there would be blank spaces where he would write his father, because he was so, his father wanted him to be the next Mozart, and so he was literally tortured to play the piano, to play it till his fingers bleed. He was like 4, 5, 6 years old. He was, humiliated. And,
Wow.
And he was no Mozart. He wasn't natural prodigy. I mean, he obviously was Beethoven, so he had some stuff. But
Right, sure.
And so you can see tangled up in the music this a cry for connection. It's also, oddly enough, one of his letters where he's sitting at the salon and he and his friends are talking about women's butts.
Yes.
That's the thing. It's like, apparently I guess that's always been a thing. But I'm not making that up. That's a real
Okay,
thing.
that
Sounds like something I would make up, but it's not made up.
Tom or I are not going to answer and respond to any of that. But okay,
But it is,
go.
yeah, it's-
So they were doing that.
Yeah,
but-
he was really sort of talking, but you can see in the letters that we have left that you can see his humanity sort of seep through and all that sort of stuff, and so there are ways to be able to look into these things and know something more about the human condition than you did before you jumped in.
It occurred to me that a lot of this, what could be considered obsessive compulsive type responding and living, if you will, always ties back into what you're doing in your work and trying to help someone else in the therapy process, or trying to broaden your own view of things and gain more information.
Finally
with
get the
that.
respect I deserve.
Right. Well,
One of
that's
the
a nifty situation in any case. But
one,
yes, sir.
one of the things that occurs to me as I listen to all this, there's so many things that it's really thought provoking. But this whole idea, are these behaviors obsessive compulsive, or is this more like what Jack Kerouac would refer to as being mad for life, passionate?
Oh, yeah,
In other words,
Oh, yeah.
his
a good
idea,
reframe right there,
and I'm
he
paraphrasing.
got
but-
you out of trouble, right?
but
there.
what Kerouac said in On the Road is he wanted to be a member of that group, that tribe that was mad for life, mad for talk, mad for living, mad for experience. And by being mad, he meant the whole idea of passion, so that he and Neil Cassidy got in the car, went on the road, and saw America and lived America. And in fact, the whole 60s thing is really engendered out of the whole Kerouac kind of trip, So those of us baby boomers, Mike, we're sort of the sons and daughters of Jack Kerouac in a lot of ways, some of our attitudes. And I wonder if that whole thing could be framed that way. But maybe I'm being too CBT about it. I'm reframing.
Well, no.
this thing.
That I like that because especially since it makes me sound less crazy. And by the way, you said
that's
you
where
guys.
I was going, but on the other hand,
You guys said you
we're
guys
good.
the,
We're
the
good.
children of Kerouac and Cassidy. That explains the smell of hash. Okay, I'm kidding. But there's a Kerouac quote. If I remember, he said that he wanted to eat with his food naked and quivering on the end of his fork, and that's where the title for Burroughs' Naked Lunch comes from a Kerouac quote. But I like that. I like the idea of being able to that Winnicott prayer, Lord, let me be alive when I die. And Freud talks about it in terms of that, we need to develop a love affair with life. And so how do we find, a way to be and there's something about that imminence, that explosion, that it can be a drug. It could be something you could pursue that could keep you away from quieter moments, I guess, too. But I like that. I like the. That's not.
Well,
it's
it makes sense in lots of ways. I think it connects with authenticity and this idea of just living life and taking advantage of all that we have. I mean, it gets back to what Tom and I were talking about with Pinker. I mean, we're in a place now that we have more. We have more riches. We have less violence. We have all of these things at our disposal. Why not go for just everything that you can learn and kind of move in this space
Yeah, but most
that
people
we're
don't.
in now?
I think that I was talking
think you're
to
right.
a patient a while back, and they were describing their ex, and they said something to the effect that, I still miss them because, and it's been years and years and years, but I miss them because they had such a passion. And this individual was really into collecting things, and they had they were into things, and so this person was saying that I've encountered a lot of people since then, but most people don't have that. And the question might be: is this passion? Is this something we're all born with, and then it gets beaten out of us? That we become departmental, we become compartmentalized, all that sort of stuff. Or is it something that some people are born with, or is it something that we have to learn to cultivate? I mean, what do you think?
If you wanted an answer to that, I would say all of the above, because I think there are some educators who say that the educational system sort of squashes that and tries to make you conform and really squashes that passion. And really what you want to do is every individual needs to find that passion. What gets them up in the morning? What makes time go by so fast when they're focused on something and using the moment, being in it is not just the phrase, but it's actually taking advantage of the resources and who you are and finding that passion within you to sort of move forward. And I think that's a goal for everyone that comes into therapy, but I think it's across the board.
But when you say that, though, I mean, maybe I'm wrong because, and it also could be because I am crazy, but
jury's out.
It is, yeah. They're not
Today
coming
we
back.
came close, but I think the jury's still out.
And the jury's out, and they decided not to come back.
They're not coming back.
Done with it.
No.
But I think that if I were to tell, obviously this is being recorded and maybe reverberating forever, the things that interest me, or how I pursue my interests, for lots of folks that's just crazy. That would not be, that would be this. What you call passion or what you call investment is frivolous. It's not. It is. So I wonder about this.
I think also just our culture and what we brought up. Those of us who came up in the 50s and the baby boomers this time had said that, what the model that we had was that you go to work for the company, you work for 30 years, you get to go watch, you retire, you singularly focus, take care of your family, go to work and do this in these very sort of narrow guidelines that we should live our lives in. And I think we're coming to find out that maybe there's other ways to do it. So maybe this is our sort of response to that.
Well, because that would be Kerouac and Cassidy were sort of reacting against that very sort of culture, right?
Yeah,
that was their, that this is mind-numbing. This is, the reason why Daddy comes home and drinks until he goes to sleep at night is because the life he has is killing him.
Well, and also I think what we're discovering now is more of the interest, and you've certainly demonstrated this with the arts, with music. Those kinds of things, other than the grind of making a living and getting through and those kind of things, we're now at a place where we can expand and look at what are we really interested in and what is my passion.
So but the question may be then, is it that if someone could find what they're passionate in, then they can then have lived moments with it, they could pursue it. So would the goal then be like, you bring them into a room and they can pick up all of these different objects, or they can look at these different things and they'll, whatever suits their fancy, okay, we'll go for that. Is that the equation, or is it? And I'm obviously have an idea about this from a psychoanalytic perspective. What else have I got? But is that the goal? Well, how do we? You guys have things that you like, right?
Well, the first thing is when we engage in that apparently human need to label everything. When we label a passion, do we maybe in some way kill its essence? In other words, they're obsessed with this concept or this kind of thing. Why that sort of is an idea that popped up. Last night I saw a band that played an amalgam of what could be called jazz, funk, rock, R&B. And they made the point that people need to call it by some name, but what I saw was just a bunch of guys blowing and playing music, I mean, they were just going. And so sometimes when we say, okay, this passion, well, that's really over the top. Well, what makes it over the top? And it has an essence. Do we kill it by trying to encompass it with some kind of label, some kind of walls around it?
There are just so many ways that I think the culture and the society we put together tends to reject that. And so they're always looking for judgment, right or wrong. This is not good, this is good. This is a category. Let's put things in pigeonholes. Let's make a label. And now, with our current society, and not to be political, but we're in these tribes, we're in the camps. And so now it's either or. So it becomes a 0 or 1. It becomes one or the other, as opposed to being those things that we can develop unique because everybody's special. Well, there's some truth to that. So I don't know. I like this discussion where we're kind of saying if you call it something, then it suddenly puts some boundaries on it. And we talked about that a little bit last week as well.
And there's a saying by Lacan. He says that the word is the murder of the thing. He also has a statement that we're the only animal tortured by language. And so,
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I love that one.
And you can see that there's a benefit of this, but and there's another famous that, if we're not, either we use language or language uses us, and usually it's language uses us. The naming is often a way, right? That there's something dangerous about passion. There's something dangerous about getting lost in something. We talked last time about the notion of between assimilation and accommodation.
Right.
To grow a mind, I mean, if you, when I think of some of my favorite music my albums, and often I didn't like them at first, right? Like, what is this crap? And then suddenly, somewhere down the line, I'm like, how have I lived without this?
Right.
I'm not the same person that started this journey with this piece of music. I'm different now. And I think there's something dangerous and scary about that. We might want to murder things, because we talked about that last time, about the tyranny of automaticity, that the goal of our nervous system is to render as much automatic as possible, because that is the easiest way to pass our genes on from an evolutionary biological perspective. Automaticity, a certain level of it, is really important. We don't want to think. We may not want to feel.
Because it's like climbing a rock wall. It's adventurous. You said something, and it really resonated with me about when two people meet and interact, that there is a disturbance, and that often we work to mitigate that disturbance. In my case, a lot of times I have a tendency to go to I'm introspective. I'm shy, so I just rather remove myself from the situation. But really, what you're removing yourself from by trying to encompass it with CBT or fight or flight, those kinds of things, what you're really doing is avoiding an adventure.
Right.
So,
and a potentially dangerous one.
Right.
Because the person across from you could disturb you in ways that you can't get undisturbed.
Right.
And I think that any adventure, there is the potential for calamity, or it wouldn't be an adventure, right?
Right.
Yep.
A roller coaster ride is the exact opposite of an adventure, right? Because it is a canned experience that has the faux risk connected to it.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's not what the average person goes to a roller coaster. They're looking for they think that's it.
If I want to but a real adventure, you could get hurt.
Well,
there could be caution tape, police tape at some point circling the place where you were. If you're not right.
That's right.
It is.
All right. Well, I was thinking that life really requires courage, and you have to take those adventures out there, and you have to look and find your passion. You have to figure out what you're willing to do, and examine life, the unexamined life, for example.
Well, and no one gets out alive anyway. So what the heck, right?
Right.
We all owe God a death.
All right, this conversation was an adventure.
It was.
So
I was disturbed. I was disturbed.
There's probably a lot of people that watch this who are going to be disturbed too. We want to apologize in advance for all the things that just happened here. Well, that was good. So can we summarize with a couple of things, or is it just too much?
Well, I'm crazy,
and we don't want to put the word on it because it interferes with it, but. I'd let that go. I didn't respond to what you just said. Okay, go ahead. So what do you think?
Could we summarize it that this is about, Freud says that the goal of life is to be as best that we can at working, loving, and playing.
Yes.
And I think we focused a little on playing today when we talk about some of the arts and music and whatnot. But, it's important that all three are, we don't want to place it. They're all equally important. So maybe the goal is how to be able to realize the dangers, potential dangers, and gains of having a lived life. Maybe.
All right, I'm good with that. Well, it's been a special day So I have to say, this has been a lot of fun.
We got hacked.
we got hacked because Dr. Hackett is in the building, and I appreciate this, Tom. I appreciate you stopping by and being a
and I
part
want
of our
to do those questions. I want those.
We're
five
doing
questions. I want those 5 questions. I want. They got to be some uncomfortable questions too. Maybe like.
Is that the?
Because we want you thoroughly disturbed for Grill the Expert.
Ask me, have I ever found my grandmother attractive?
Listen, if we didn't talk about it today, I don't know if we're going to have a breakthrough with these 5 questions. I think we got a lot out today for something, and I don't know what just happened. That was my phrase. What just happened?
I didn't deliver the punchline of that joke because it's really inappropriate.
Yes.
But
all right, we're
funny.
gonna end on that note. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, come back. Let's do this again. Talk to you next time.
So as you suggested, though, there is another limit. If you can add enough mass to a star to overcome even neutron degenerate pressure, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, can happen, then there's a theoretical limit where neutron degenerate pressure can withstand the force of crushing gravity. That is called the Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit. You might recognize the name Oppenheimer from the Manhattan Project. Right. So he was one of the scientists who worked on that. By the way, the white dwarf line was the Chandrasekhar limit. He's also another fairly famous scientist. Chandra is what we call him a lot, but Chandrasekhar. So anyway, the Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, once you push the mass past that point, and you get to that Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, neutron degenerate pressure can no longer stop this stuff. And you have the ultimate collapse, which then defies even our ability to understand what takes place. We leave the realm of understandable physics, at least at this point in our understanding. And all of that mass collapses down into what's known as a singularity. Right. This is a phenomenon predicted by Einstein in the general theory of relativity. It was largely disbelieved by the majority of the physics community that could even be a possibility until we started finding them. We started seeing, well, let me be careful. We started seeing the results of the presence of objects that defied any other possible explanation except that a black hole must be somehow involved. How do you see a black hole? You don't. How do you see the existence of a black hole? You see material around the outside responding to that intense gravitational field in the proximity of a black hole. And that stuff, by the way, is doomed. It's on infall. It's falling into the black hole. So you don't see the black hole itself, you see the results of the black hole.
So when it falls into the black hole, then really essentially what's happening is all its particles are crushed as well.
Yeah.
Into that mass. Is that correct?
Yes. A black hole is effectively a one-way cul-de-sac. You drive in, you can't get out. And the gravitational field in the immediate vicinity of the edge of the black hole, which is known as an event horizon, that gravitational field is so strong that even light can't escape it. If light's sitting right on the edge, it'll simply go around in circles around that black hole forever. If light gets any closer to the black hole, it falls in past the event horizon, and quite frankly, nobody has a flaming idea what happens to it then. Not the energy, not the mass, not anything, because quite simply our physics breaks down, and we can't get any information to come out of that event horizon, so there's no possibility of making a measurement. So it gets weird, is the point.
In some ways, as opposed to a spectator of a horror film, you may find yourself in the middle of it, even after you leave the theater. And, there's lots of talk in this notion of locus of control.
Right.
And individuals who have externalized their locus of control, they're often in a horror movie. There are all these ways in which we are that if when people enter therapy, what often happens is they begin to modulate the things they feel. They begin to experience an extended locus of control. That euthymic window broadens. These are all things that can happen that you can work towards, right?
But yeah, and I was thinking, we mentioned the family members and somebody who would never see these horror movies. They're restricting themselves in a certain way because of that. But also, on a conscious level, it's like I don't want to be exposed to that. It's too real. In other words, they sort of label it as this movie, and I've said that to my wife on a number of occasions. These actors are getting paid a lot of money to have their hands cut off or whatever that might be.
Well, what do you think about
special
this,
effects, it's not real. And I'm not sure that everybody, I think people are kind of like at the surface level of thinking that it hits them in that way, even though they know.
Well, why do you think that would be then? So because, for instance, in your case, you can navigate these sort of stage traumas in a horror film by saying, well, this is good special effects. You can allow yourself a capacity to be both participant and observer in the film, and you can generate enough observer self-reflective status to be able to say, okay, right now, let me remind myself this is just, and the special effects are great. Some people can't.
Getting better.
What now?
They're getting better.
They're getting better,
I
yeah.
mean, it looks like,
right.
It would convince some people that it's real.
Come
out of
a
context,
long way since
a little
Plan
bit,
9 from Outer Space. But but others don't seem to have that capacity. Well, what do you think about that? Why would?
I don't know. I'm almost thinking that it's some defense mechanism where we are resistant to exposing ourselves to it. That at some level are telling ourselves we can't quite manage that, or we don't want to manage it, and therefore it's a protective mechanism that we kind of keep ourselves away from that because what it might turn up in us, and maybe a little afraid of that. But yeah, I think you're right about the exposure of it. The more you're kind of exposed and you see it, the greater capacity you have to manage it.
Well, I wonder where that capacity, and there probably is some research on this in terms of is there a certain character structure that respond to horror movies a certain way? Maybe even attachment styles. Are there? Is there something about the ways in which we organize our inner selves or the maps we have for the world that may tell us something about how we're able to watch or not watch a horror movie? Right. Like I wonder.
I mean, just on a simple level, it's this is going to connect with some trauma that the person has, and they are trying it by all means to avoid going back and looking at that. When we know in therapy that's exactly where we need to go to sort of work through that issue, whatever that trauma might be, and come out on the other side.
That idea
of
the edge, that growth edge.
Yes.
To be able to come to a place where someone is just at a spot where they are experiencing just enough anxiety, and to help them to be able to regulate that, to modulate it, or to modulate it, hopefully, and to be able to get them through modulation to be able to move a little further through it.
Right.
I don't think too many people. I've had people come into therapy and say, they're afraid of flying, or they have some specific phobias. I haven't had anyone come in and say they have a fear of. They want to be able to overcome their horror movie fear, but well,
it might be diagnostic to just ask them about horror movies. How many horror movies have you seen? I never go to horror movies or whatever. They might respond to that. It might be kind of fun as a research project, perhaps.
But what about you could have the opposite problem? Like, what about someone who is drawn to horror movies? Individuals who are within the psychopathic realm. They often have to chase louder and more intense experiences because that's what they need to feel some sense of life. There are individuals whose relationship to the abject may be such that, as opposed to some sort of healthy disownership, they are somehow immersed in it. That the serial killer that may want to find themselves awash in their victim's viscera. Right? this is the opposite of the sort of disowning and dance with the abject that we might expect in a, quote, healthy person. So we could say that, maybe there's a connection between too much consumption or that of horror movies that may say something too.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a good point. It may be almost like a tolerance level that you have to get another fix from the substance abuse literature, that the tolerance level is sort of continues to bump up, and you have to have more and more to associate that kind of thing. Well, that's interesting. So my question back to you about this, and I appreciate all the that was very insightful discussion, but I'm guessing that you have a hard time enjoying this horror movie that you're going to see because you're running it through that psychoanalytic filter, and you're watching out for these kind of things that we just talked about. And I'm a little concerned that, wait, what about the entertainment value for you? Can you just say, wow?
Well, here's the thing, because this is why I think that there is you want to be able to balance the participant observer element. So, and what that means is you are both present, but also have the capacity for self-reflection and experiences. And your capacity for flexibility with that is important. If like we mentioned the Tarantino last week,
sure,
it's usually only afterwards that I begin to think about it. If it's a really good film, it creates a holding space where I become
draws you in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the benefits of that film, we talked about it last time, is you felt sort of sad because you were leaving. Like, it created enough of an atmosphere, like you were there, and it was a place you wanted to be, and so in a way, if the movie's effective, and that's that old aesthetic notion of form versus content. If somebody creates the right sort of form, then I think your ego can be suspended, and you can have a regression. You can find yourself. It's sometimes talked about in the psychological literature as a temporary form of psychosis, that you allow your boundaries to be diffuse and move into it. So. Part of the reason why I was excited about the movie, and the movie I'm going to see is Midsommar, right? Midsommar, something like that.
Yes. Okay. There you go.
Part of what drew me to it is this is a director who's known for being quite good. Okay. This is, I think, his second film. I think Heredity is his first, which I didn't see.
I really like to. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in, but the idea of being a good director and what does that mean? I'd love to explore that some more. We get to talk about that maybe at another point. But what goes into making that? Is it the editing? Is it the way the shot was done? I think.
And think
that's
about
an
how
important idea.
Some of that might be taught, sort of a little like becoming a good therapist, but but a chunk of it also has to be earned, maybe even born with. Because, if this guy, and this guy may be a lousy director, it's going to be a 8-hour movie, so it better be good. But,
no, but I think it is about 3 hours, so get ready for that. Oh, my goodness.
And my wife, who is a rule, tends to avoid horror movies just like yours. Right. She decided she wanted to see this, so I may only get to see 30 minutes of it.
Okay, bolt out.
I'm gonna be checking on her. So, but if they can. Part of what drew me to this is an individual who has a reputation for creating that space, and probably what needs to happen in a good horror movie, maybe we could talk about this at another time too, is that if you think about like the movie Aliens, for instance, it wasn't just constant things busting out of someone's chest.
Oh, no.
They created an atmosphere.
It was the lead up to it.
Right.
And that, down that hallway and the sounds and what's going to happen next. It's like almost a scene in all of those, some of the horror movies, quite a few, is that long shot down the hallway where there's a door at the end. And we're getting closer and closer to finding out what's behind that door.
And there's music, there's sound.
Yes.
You really create a space that you can exist in. So I think that in some ways, it's certainly up to me to be able to approach it with the possibility of that ego diffusion. But I'm also going to require a really good horror film, creates a space. And, even a really cheesy horror film creates a space because it gives you that feeling of, staying up late at night watching horror movies when you were a kid, or it offers a different sort of regression. And maybe another thing to talk about sometimes is the different forms of horror, because there's body horror films, they're all different kinds, and they all scratch different itches, And this, I think, and again, I've avoided too much information on it because I wanted to be able to approach it with a.
Sure.
But I think it is sort of a slow burner, and it's,
Right.
it's supposed to create sort of
Kinda
this
lead you
paranoid atmosphere. And
Right.
if you think about like Rosemary's Baby or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the different horror films that
Right.
that part of the form that you are walking around in is one of paranoia, one of
A little edge of fear there that you're moving to something and not really sure.
And it's these kinds of ideas that lead into the weird world of quantum computing, which, by the way, is a pioneer field. We're not there yet, right? We don't have effective quantum computers, but the imagination can become, I can store data, I can access it instantly, and I can store infinite quantities of that data.
And that may be the next big technological revolution, right? That generates all the new jobs and things we can't even imagine.
Correct. Now, I don't want to shortchange quantum mechanical research that's going on in a variety of other fields, like just material science. We understand materials that we can build all kinds of new custom ceramics or paints or maybe a film that is photovoltaic in nature, where you could actually paint your house and your whole house becomes a solar collector. All of those things boil down to what's happening at the subatomic level, which we understand by quantum mechanics. So those are everyday applications of quantum mechanics that take place all the time. We just don't really think of those. But what seems more, glamorous, sexy, it's at least filling up the internet right now, is this whole notion of quantum computing, which it's because of the astounding, almost infinite capability of data storage and rapid transfer of information that we see that as a pioneering area, which is just a frontier that we really want to go explore more. And so that is something that's taking place at the boundary of computer science and quantum physics.
So really, when you're talking about actually applying quantum principles in materials, in material use, not necessarily computing use, it still has some of those same communications ramifications.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you could have smart paint, you could have Terminator style bots, all kinds of things could exist that is right now just the realm of science fiction, right?
That's
or am
right.
I too far off base?
Well, look, everything that we manufacture is built of materials. Mm-hmm. All materials at their atomic level behave according to the rules of quantum mechanics. So the more that we come up with designer materials that never existed on Earth before, somewhere there's a quantum physicist figuring out the quantum mechanics that leads to the chemistry involved with developing those new custom materials. So the border of chemistry and physics is really material science. And so you find application at these crossover points, right? You have these physicists doing fundamental research on quantum mechanics. You have these chemists trying to invent new kinds of materials. They find themselves at a junction where they're trying to understand the same principles. They begin to collaborate, and that's what moves that forward. In another place, you have the junction between computer science and quantum physics, where computer science is trying to solve these problems about data storage and data transfer and all these kinds of making things faster, more smaller, all those kinds of things. And you have quantum physicists trying to understand the nature of matter at the smallest scale. And they find a junction point, and suddenly quantum computing is born, right? So a lot of times when we come up with new inventions, new ideas, new frontiers in what we think of as science and technology, you're seeing these intersections between multiple disciplines, where there's even intersections between say education and physics, or between a variety of other things. Psychology, understanding the human mind, and understanding how particles work that make up our brains, right?
It's interesting you're going there, because as you're talking, I was thinking back to the idea of human behavior and human communication and how we evolve and what ultimately might happen, how people might communicate. Some of the things that seem far out, new agey, may not be so far out and new agey when we realize that really what's happening in the brain is chemical interactions and electrical impulses and across synapses.
Kinds of ideas that lead into the weird world of quantum computing, which, by the way, is a pioneer field. We're not there yet, right? We don't have effective quantum computers, but the imagination can become, I can store data, I can access it instantly, and I can store infinite quantities of that data.
And that may be the next big technological revolution, right? That generates all the new jobs and things we can't even imagine.
Correct. Now, I don't want to shortchange quantum mechanical research that's going on in a variety of other fields, like just material science. We understand materials that we can build all kinds of new custom ceramics or paints or maybe a film that is photovoltaic in nature, where you could actually paint your house and your whole house becomes a solar collector. All of those things boil down to what's happening at the subatomic level, which we understand by quantum mechanics. So those are everyday applications of quantum mechanics that take place all the time. We just don't really think of those. But what seems more, glamorous, sexy, it's at least filling up the internet right now, is this whole notion of quantum computing, which it's because of the astounding, almost infinite capability of data storage and rapid transfer of information that we see that as a pioneering area, which is just a frontier that we really want to go explore more. And so that is something that's taking place at the boundary of computer science and quantum physics.
So really, when you're talking about actually applying quantum principles in materials, in material use, not necessarily computing use, it still has some of those same communications ramifications. Yeah. So theoretically, you could have smart paint, you could have Terminator style bots, all kinds of things could exist that is right now just the realm of science fiction, right?
That's
or am I too far off base?
Well, look, everything that we manufacture is built of materials. All materials at their atomic level behave according to the rules of quantum mechanics. So the more that we come up with designer materials that never existed on Earth before, somewhere there's a quantum physicist figuring out the quantum mechanics that leads to the chemistry involved with developing those new custom materials. So the border of chemistry and physics is really material science. And so you find application at these crossover points, right? You have these physicists doing fundamental research on quantum mechanics. You have these chemists trying to invent new kinds of materials. They find themselves at a junction where they're trying to understand the same principles. They begin to collaborate, and that's what moves that forward. In another place, you have the junction between computer science and quantum physics, where computer science is trying to solve these problems about data storage and data transfer and all these kinds of making things faster, more smaller, all those kinds of things. And you have quantum physicists trying to understand the nature of matter at the smallest scale. And they find a junction point, and suddenly quantum computing is born, right? So a lot of times when we come up with new inventions, new ideas, new frontiers in what we think of as science and technology, you're seeing these intersections between multiple disciplines, where there's even intersections between say education and physics, or between a variety of other things. Psychology, understanding the human mind, and understanding how particles work that make up our brains, right?
It's interesting you're going there, because as you're talking, I was thinking back to the idea of human behavior and human communication and how we evolve and what ultimately might happen, how people might communicate. Some of the things that seem far out, new agey, may not be so far out and new agey when we realize that really what's happening in the brain is chemical interactions and electrical impulses and across synapses.
You're keeping up with the latest. Give us some idea of just some recent events that have occurred that you've been really focused on, and maybe some things that are down the pipe just a little bit that we can look forward to. And I'm talking about the rest of us out here who are really fascinated with astronomy and what's happening in our world. What's on the horizon? What are we doing?
You know, I think this is true, and I'm going to ask for an apology for repeating something, but I think this is just so important that it bears repeating, which is, for the entire history of humanity, everything that we've ever known about our universe, all of that information has always come to us in the form of light. In fact, one of the things I teach on my first day of every astronomy class, every intro astronomy class that I teach, is astronomy's prejudiced. Astronomy is prejudiced to things that glow in the dark, right? If something's not glowing in the dark, or interacting with something else that's glowing in the dark, or reflecting light from something else, we don't even know it's there, because the only way information travels to us from objects in deep space is in the form of these things that we know of as electromagnetic waves. Light, right? Various forms that we can see or can't see, but it's still all light. Radio waves light, microwaves are light, all this stuff is light, right? But we've just entered into a brand new era where we now have a brand new tool never possessed by humanity to be able to measure the universe, where we can see right through things. And that is gravitational waves. So I know we touched on this earlier in the show, but it's important, I guess, it bears repeating to say, we don't know where that's going to lead us. We can see into the heart of a galaxy through any manner of obscuring material, because the information coming to us is not electromagnetic radiation. It's these ripples of the universe called gravitational waves that just penetrate right on through. And now we can actually measure them, which is simply astounding, right? And so when you ask what's next, I think in the world of astronomy, we're going to spend a lot more time measuring gravitational waves. And it's not that we'll give up our pursuit of ever better ways to measure electromagnetic radiation, because you always want to correlate those observations, right? You want to say, well, we can see it in microwaves and we can see it in radio, but now we can also detect its gravitational wave signature. I think that before too long, humanity will probably likely build a gravitational wave observatory in space. That's not a new idea. That idea has been around for decades. But now it seems a lot more sexy because, hey, we figured out we can actually measure these things. It's hard to justify building a gravitational wave observatory in space when the ones on the ground aren't measuring a darn thing, right? Right. You've never measured it ever. But now we've entered into a whole new era where we have gravitational wave observations. So the impetus to build that next generation of detectors of gravitational waves, is now there. And so what will they reveal about the history of our cosmos, or multiverses, or the lack of multiverses, or whatever? We don't know. We don't have the faintest idea. But that is certainly what I can see on the horizon in terms of we have just found, we are in the absolute infancy of a brand new technology that we can measure the universe in a way that we never even fathomed before. Where will that lead us? I have no idea.
That's incredible.
But it's exciting, right? Super, super exciting.
The other things I think we wanted to maybe take a look at is the whole idea of some of the big, I guess, glamorous ideas from quantum physics. Mm-hmm. Like one is the idea of superposition, and the idea that the other thing, the uncertainty principle, where we really don't know where a particle is. We can only predict where a particle might be until we observe it, and then it seems like it collapses to where it is in that place. That's really hard for a layperson to understand. It's certainly hard for me to comprehend.
So before we dive into the deep pool of quantum mechanics, it's helpful to remind people that the universe is under no obligation to make it easy for you to understand. Right? That's one of my favorite quotes. One of my other favorite quotes is, the universe is not only stranger than we know, it's stranger than we can know. Mm-hmm. And I think both of those things are, those are good statements to dwell on a little bit before we jump into quantum mechanics. So the Chandrasekhar limit, where you couldn't put two electrons in the same place at the same time, and the Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, where you couldn't put two neutrons in the same place at the same time, both have their roots in quantum mechanics, which basically says this. We think of, in our macroscopic world, in our big picture world that we experience in daily life, we think about the fundamental objects that we want to measure as particles. They're little, we can break everything down to smaller and smaller billiard balls,
right,
so to speak, right? And we tend to think of atoms and molecules as being made out of those billiard balls. But the truth is that a whole new branch of physics was required to really help us to understand what's happening at the atomic and subatomic levels, and that's quantum mechanics. And in quantum mechanics, the basic entity of existence is not particles, but it's waves. Everything can be described as waves. Now we have a different word for that in quantum mechanics. We call that the state function. It's the state function that really describes all of reality, all of existence. And so these wave functions, which make up our understanding of particles, shows us that what we measure as particles in our macroscopic world are just manifestation of these underlying wave functions.
Hence the experiment that showed light as both waves and particles.
Exactly. And so it's not that light is a wave sometimes and a particle other times. It's just that depending on how we measure it, we see particle-like properties or wave-like properties.
I've never heard that explained.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So
that really makes that a lot more clear.
What happens when a black hole consumes a neutron star, which I thought a neutron star was sort of a black hole,
Yeah, they're certainly in a related class of objects. And so probably the best thing to do, though, is talk about what a star actually is. And then we can talk about these exotic stars, because they're really just exotic forms of a star. So if you think about a star, you think of the sun, it's like, well, I understand the sun. It's a big ball of fire. Well, actually, it's not, right? So the sun's not on fire. A lot of people have that misconception. It doesn't even have very much oxygen in it at all. And you know that if your clothes catch on fire, you need to stop, drop, and roll, right? That's because you're cutting off the oxygen supply. Well, the sun's not on fire. It's not made out of oxygen. Primarily, the sun is made out of hydrogen and helium. Now, it does have other fractions of contents in it, like oxygen, but not enough to burn. So the sun is a machine that generates a thermonuclear process in its core. That thermonuclear process, let's divide that word out. Thermo means hot, and nuclear means it refers to nuclear reactions. So there are nuclear reactions taking place at the center of our star that turn hydrogen into helium by this process called nucleosynthesis. You're generating energy by taking two hydrogen atoms, shoving them together in a manner where they stick together at a nuclear level and become a helium nucleus. You actually lose a little bit of mass in that process, which is really unusual. But where does that mass go? Well, it goes into Einstein's other equation called E equals mc squared, one of his favorite poems, of mine at least. That's my favorite Einstein sonnet. The sonnet or the haiku, I'm not really sure. Anyway, E equals mc squared. So E means energy, m is mass, and c is the speed of light, which we know is a big number. Then you square that really big number, right? So if there's a little tiny bit of mass that disappears, when you take two hydrogens, collapse them together into one helium nucleus, where does that energy go? Where does that mass go? It goes into that Einsteinian equation as the m It gets multiplied by the speed of light squared, which is a truly large number. And then what do you get out the other side on the other side of the equal sign? Well, you get a little respectable burst of energy. A little puff of energy comes out the other side, right? So mass is actually lost as it's converted into energy. That's why it doesn't violate the conservation of principle of conservation of mass or conservation of energy. It's just shifting from one form to the other.
Right.
Well, here's the thing. The sun converts more than 4 million tons of mass to energy per second. 4 million tons goes into the m side of that equation, then gets multiplied by the speed of light squared, which the speed of light is a ridiculously large number. Then you square it and you get an even bigger number. What comes out the other side of that equation? More energy than human beings have ever created in their entire existence, including all of the power plants and nuclear weapons, any kind of power source you can imagine ever generated by humanity. The sun generates far more than that in simply 1 second of that thermonuclear fusion process. So, okay, well, now you've generated all kinds of heat and energy. It sounds like an explosion. That should just rip this star apart. Well, it doesn't, because the sun is also extraordinarily massive. And so the mass of the sun is trying to, through its gravitational force, trying to squeeze that gas down into a single point. But yet these explosions in the core are trying to blow the star apart. So you have this, so what a star is, you have this situation where it's a balance of pressure trying to rip the star apart from the inside out, gravity trying to crush the star down into a singularity, and neither force winning. It sits there as a balance, and it does it for billions of years. So a star itself is an amazing machine. It's just on this cusp of a balance between gravity trying to squish it out of existence, pressure trying to blow it apart. Okay, so if that's what a star is, what happens when the fuel's all gone in the middle? So if you converted all your hydrogen to helium, or at least most of it, well, a star can get by converting heavier elements like helium into other things like carbon, and it can convert, as long as the star's big enough, it can convert materials all the way up to iron. And so it can synthesize these new things that we find on the periodic table all the way up to iron. But then once you get to iron, squeezing iron nuclei together into heavier elements does not produce energy. It actually begins to cost energy. And at that point, the star's a goner. So then what happens? Well, then gravity wins, because the star can no longer produce heat that can cause the expanding out process. So the crushing in process is going to win.
But it still has the mass.
It still has the mass, exactly.
So that's what causes the gravity to push in.
So exactly. So all that mass is still there. Now, some of that mass has been lost to the universe in the form of radiation, energy streaming out, but there's still plenty of mass there, right? Now you have this star-sized object. And actually, the stars that can get this far are much more massive than the sun. They're more massive than the sun to start with by a factor of 8 or something like that. So those stars now have nothing restricting their gravity to collapse. And they crush down into smaller and smaller objects with all of that mass, which means the gravitational field around that object gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Because the closer you are to an object, the stronger the gravitational field is. And so as this tremendous mass gets into a smaller and smaller shape, or a smaller and smaller size, something has to stop that collapse, right? Well, there are various then laws that we find from the weird world of quantum mechanics that begin to stop this collapse. And the first of those is something called electron degenerate pressure, which from a layman's standpoint means you can't take two electrons and shove them together into the same exact place at the same exact time. And so since electrons just won't have it, then that resistive force begins to stop the collapse up to a certain mass level. And so there are many objects that are held in place, in check from collapsing, called white dwarfs, that are stopped by electron degenerate pressure. Okay, that's what's going to happen to our sun, by the way, someday. It'll form a white dwarf based on that process. If the star's more massive, though, even that electron degenerate pressure can be overcome. And so it actually will go past that level of quantum mechanics where you squeeze electrons out of existence entirely so that you can't have electron degenerate pressure anymore. In fact, the protons and electrons cease to exist, and the whole thing turns into a soup of neutrons, neutrally charged particles. And you can squeeze those down a lot farther. So now you've gone past this barrier where you even have electrons and protons that normal mass is made out of. You only have a big ball of neutrons, and that thing squeezes down ever smaller, until another force of quantum mechanics called neutron degenerate pressure stops the expansion. And that's basically almost the same thing. You can't take two neutrons that have the same state, same position, same time, and shove them into the same location. So it resists that force. And that object then stopped by neutron degenerate pressure is a neutron star. Now what you have is you have something with the mass of, say, 4 or 5 suns squished down into a volume about the size of our city, Columbus, Georgia.
So you could end up with a white dwarf, but then if it continues to collapse further, you end up with a neutron star.
Correct.
I see where you're going. And I've been taking jazz, so I can relate to it. It's really very unrewarding for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you'll get like an epiphany, and you'll go, "Oh, I'm hearing that harmony that I." Before you're looking at the music and you're going, "What are they doing?" That kind of thing.
Well, I don't read music, and I can't appreciate it on that level, but I can like what always struck me, and I started listening to jazz with free jazz because it connected with the punk and the noise and the death metal stuff that I was listening to. And
you were into some atonal like Cage and,
Yeah,
and
like-
some of those.
I still like
take
that
a bunch
stuff.
of pots and pans and roll them down the stairs.
I'm still a fan. But what struck
Love
me
it.
is it is so completely imminent and immersive. Like you can drop into a good jazz tune anywhere you want. It's never the same song. Like I can listen to one of those, particularly when he had his classic quartet, I can listen to that same song 100 times. It's never the same song.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to Garrison or I'm listening to
Right,
Jones.
right.
And as I get older, it makes more sense to me.
Right.
Like suddenly I'm like, I was too young, but now I'm getting it, Now I got the feel.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting because part of the parallel with, not that I'm by any means, but Coltrane was obsessed with a character named Doc Savage. And Doc Savage was a pulp hero from the
Right,
30s and 40s,
right.
50s, up until the late 50s, and then he stopped. And I was a kid. I was obsessed with Doc Savage. And Doc Savage would get up every morning at 4 in the morning.
Oh.
And he would exercise, and he would read, and he would do 2 hours of body and mind training every morning. And Coltrane did the same thing. And I did the same thing. Literally, that's what started me this whole thing. I remember as a kid, okay, I gotta do whatever. And this obsessive focus on learning a skill and all that sort of stuff. Like you guys were talking about like how you just sort of wandered into college and all that sort of stuff. And my experience from birth in the womb is being an obsessive neurotic bastard. There was always, I've got to get be the best at this. I have to be able to learn this. I have to be. It's like not like you were talking about playing ping pong. I think I may have played 3 ping pong games in my life.
Right.
And if I played ping pong,
But if it was online,
and if I played ping pong, I would play 750 hours a week of ping pong until I could be.
So you could be really great at it.
That's all I could do. Like when I started playing disc golf, like literally, there's a towel in my office, and I practice every day for hours on my form. That's what I do. That's what I. Till I can get it, okay, I got to be able to throw 400 feet. Got to be able to, okay, I got 400 feet. I got to be able to do this. So literally, when you talk about this stuff, I'm crazy.
Well, you're just not part of the slacker culture.
Well, I think it's a
that's
form.
right.
I think it's a form of slacker because it keeps me away from maybe some other things.
Yeah.
There's a thing there
You
that
got the depth. It's the breadth of
Yeah,
it.
it's like my wife will be like, what is it? Well, the first time we hung out, and my wife regrets saying this. She'll try to take it back, but in a few minutes she goes, I wish you drank, because we could just be sitting there enjoying this, but I can tell. Like we were at
Here we go.
Jarfly. She's sitting there, she's got a drink, and she's just hanging out. And she goes, "You look so intense," and I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm I've been reading up on this some existential constructs, and I'm thinking about how to be able, like she said, but she's having a drink.
She's like, dial it back, bro.
And I'm like,
The game's on, the music's playing, whatever it is. It's like,
I'm like, wow. Like even like when somebody posted on, I'm a huge fan of this band called Wire. They're one of the first art punk bands from the '70s, and I'm obsessed with them, like everything. And so somebody posted online 3 weeks ago their favorite post 2000 Wire songs because they reformed and they've been, and so for the last 3 weeks I've been rehearsing in my mind with those 10. I keep going over it. I can't be that one. So I go home, and if I have any time like this morning, when I go home at some point today, I'm gonna listen to a couple hours of Wire. I'm gonna go through there. That's a good one, but I don't know. But in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna have my list.
All right. So one of the things I know about that type of issue is there's no end. There's actually no goal that you reach and go, aha, whew, man, made it. No, it's the next thing that starts before the last one ends. So it's an ongoing chain, and I'm just adding that thought to the conversation.
Oh, I have a friend of mine. We went to school together, and she's a psychologist too. And she would say, I walk into a bookstore and I feel so overwhelmed that I'll never read those books.
Right.
And it really struck me because I walk into a bookstore and say, oh, thank God I'll never finish this. Because what would I do if I did?
That's it.
That's why, when I discovered Soulseek, and I could steal any album, and you name the most obscure album ever made, and somebody on Soulseek has it because they're all obsessive bastards. And it's like I found the ocean. I'm like, man, I will never drink this. It will always be present for me in some form or fashion. And so,
it's about
now,
passion.
okay? I'm fine with that because there's a lot of content. If we're making podcasts, I mean, we never run out. All right, so that's a good thing. And on the other hand, okay, relaxing, being comfortable, be in the moment, let it go. We talked about mindfulness. We talked about relaxation. Just got kind of get off the grid, get to a place where you're comfortable, and this moment is great.
Yeah, there's a concept of a lived moment. And again, I'm an obsess over the lived moment.
I've asked you about this, by the way, over a period of time.
The vertices of the lived moment. And like I think there is a way to take the passion to there is a teaching embedded in Coltrane's music about how to exist and how to be present for the breath that you have, how to be present for the moment that you have no choice but to experience in some form or fashion. And you can bring that to bear on things. I mean that's not I mean it is when I say being driven that's certainly a thing that I am.
Well, the problem I think is that you don't let yourself relax and be in that moment because something else kind of kicks back in that you've got to do. You're sort of searching. And there's always something more out there.
But here's the thing, because I think that when you talk about the live moment, there's such a thing it's the imminent experience. And you guys may experience this with music, but I can have part of the reason I've never done drugs is because